from your discussions.
Just make sure it doesn't.
Okay, sure. No questions? Yes, microphone. There we go. Yes, sweetheart.
Robina, what's the difference between intention and motivation, please?
Intention is I will, and then motivation is what we'd say reason. But it's so interesting, this one, because you think about it, most of what we do is kind of automatic, like eating, how we eat, we sleep, we go to the toilet, we intend, but we don't really ever notice our motivation. We would say, but what Buddha's saying is, this is where it's a bit depressing, most of the time we're motivated by attachment. Our motivation is attachment. What drives us to sleep, what drives us to talk, what drives us to move this way, what drives us to wake up, what drives us to do anything is attachment. So it sounds depressing, like we're some kind of monster. But we think it's so normal we don't notice, because we're programmed. It's so spontaneous. So we very rarely notice that that's what our motivation is for mostly. That's what Buddha means by being in samsara. We're driven by mostly doing what I want. You understand?
Yep.
That's so. It's really important to see that it's like, because it seems like it's the one thing. We don't even break it down into two. You understand?
Yes.
Oh, I think I'll eat. You don't say I will eat, or you don't say. Well, you can almost say the motivation comes first. Attachment. I'm hungry. Then you intend to eat. So it almost is, in a sense, that's what drives first. Then the intention comes. Like I'm bored, I'll walk out the door, sort of thing. I'm tired, I'll walk out the door. I'm hungry, I will sleep. So mostly it's attachment. We call it lots of other things, but it's mostly just what I want. And that's when it gets difficult when we're relating to other human beings, because they want something different. How dare they? That's why we have That's why we have fights. You want to go to that movie, I want to go to this movie. We both want to go to the movies, but you understand. Because we want what I want. So intention, motivation, yeah. Often they say intention meaning like motivation. So it's just when you understand the crucial thing to get here is that the word intention is actually the real meaning of karma. The wish, the thought, volition, I will. It's like the start of everything. And then packed under it, informing it is usually the delusion behind it. And so what we're aiming for, of course, being on the Mahayana path, and this is where the compassion business comes in. Here, and we'll talk more about that aspect of it now, directly talking about compassion, that we have to try, and that's why we have to try and develop a bodhicitta motivation for what we're trying to do. And I'll try to explain that because it sounds a bit abstract to us. Do you understand? Because the motivation for what we intend to do and therefore do is the key factor that determines the character of the action, which means whether it's negative or positive. That's the key point. That's the key point. That's why you could say one person killing a mouse out of compassion, really, even though they're foolish and the poor mouse goes from the frying pan into the fire. You didn't help the mouse at all. You made it worse even. But you could say because your motivation was pure, relatively, you don't create negative karma or much negative karma. So the motivation is the crucial thing. Yeah.
Robina, do we get into a problem when we don't want to be honest about what our motivation is?
Well, of course, because we don't even notice it. We pretend.
Yeah,
That's
I think the role.
Go on.
So the role of hypocrisy, where we're not being clear with ourselves about why we're doing things, or
That's right.
trying to present to other people.
Precisely.
Doing things.
Absolutely.
I think that's
Totally.
the beginning of neurosis, isn't it?
It's how we are.
Yeah.
And we are ego is very tricky because we want to always, because we have such a massive attachment, because the other delusions all playing their role, and one of the deepest ones is this attachment to being seen as a good girl. Attachment to present to ourselves, So we're lying in our teeth to ourselves. You're absolutely right. And then, of course, we attempt to present the best thing to other people. It's very natural. It's very natural. And because we're not aware of our mind, we're as blind as bats. We fool ourselves. And sometimes we can't fool others, but we're fooling ourselves,
Is that where wisdom becomes very important?
Absolutely.
In terms of understanding the necessity of clarity and
Absolutely.
non-hypocrisy?
Absolutely, and that's where we have got to see our minds intimately and precisely and clearly and well, and that's the real job of that's the job we have to learn, and have incredible integrity to want to see our minds. And that means, first of all, to even recognize what delusions are, recognize the role of attachment, how pervasive it is, and recognize how aversion is a response when it doesn't get what it wants. All this stuff, unpacking all this stuff and knowing it really well. That's the basis. I mean, it's like, this is the basis. This is the nuts and bolts of being your own therapist. Being your own therapist doesn't mean closing your eyes and being mindful and seeing, because it's not enough to do that. It's one of the big things that is really important. I've got a very strong, there's a very strong movement now among many people of mindfulness, which is fantastic. But I think we can easily misinterpret it and think that being aware of something, noticing, being mindful, okay, in itself is enough. But it's a bit like, you decide you're going to concentrate on the garden. You're going to be mindful of the garden. So you're really looking at everything in the garden. You could get such good mindfulness, couldn't you? Such good clarity that you could even replicate the garden in a drawing because you remember it all. You with me, people? Mm-hmm. That's being mindful. But if you don't know botany, what good is looking at the garden? Mm-hmm. Well, even drawing a picture of it. If you don't know there's a weed and there's a herb, it's like stupidity. So being just mindful, thinking that just closing your eyes and observing your feelings, you've got to know how to interpret what's there. And that's the tricky part. It is a minefield. Like if you don't know botany, you get crystal clear picture, but you can't tell the difference between a herb, a weed or a flower because you don't know that you haven't studied botany. So this is the really crucial piece. We've got to study Buddha's botany, Buddha's psychology, which gives us the ability to identify when I'm being mindful, oh, that's anger, there's attachment, there's jealousy. And then we bring that to bear in our daily life and we get more and more skillful about observing our mind. And this goes to really subtle levels.
And naming.
That's precisely. If you can't name what's in the garden, what's the point of being mindful? What's the point of being mindful if you can't name what's there? And the fact is we know the words jealousy, attachment, anger, but I would suggest our view of what those are in the West is very different from Buddha's. We refer to them, we talked about this yesterday if you're here, we refer to those as the emotions, which is the feeling that hits the body. But until we can go beyond the feeling and get into the actual conceptual story that is what attachment and anger and jealousy are, and hear the story, to hear what attachment's saying, to hear the story of jealousy, to hear the story of anger, the words, the conceptual story, until we get to that level, which is beneath the emotion, we can't really know our own minds, therefore we can't really change our minds.
Thank you.
Do you understand?
Thank you.
So it's quite an intricate job, Yes.
Just
back here.
thinking about what you were talking about before about having trouble getting hold of concepts like karma because the way that we've been programmed makes it very difficult for us. So, for example, without judgment in a Christian country, a lot of that stuff is going to kind of form the construct of the psyche of who we are.
That's right.
So how to break that down so that we can start to really engage with those concepts at a level that's not through this lens of how we've been programmed, I guess.
I think the only way to see is, okay, I think first of all, it's interesting. When we get brought up, we get brought up, don't we? In this culture, we get brought up with concepts. And there's always wherever. First of all, this is what we don't really think of in the West. We come already programmed with masses of viewpoints before we even come out of our mother's womb. We've already, it's like you can see this. We say a mummy and daddy have. I was thinking, the Columbine kids. Those the recent. I remember 20 years ago, those two kids who did that shooting wherever it was in Colorado or somewhere. It was quite famous. One of the first big shootings of. Well, you understand. And this 20 years later, I saw a memoir of one of the mothers and the torture and the suffering she's been through this last 20 years, giving birth to this wacko boy. And so we don't think, in the West, and this you could see with her, she was racked with guilt and grief and shame and loss. She got rejected, she got blamed because this monstrous kid doing this crazy shooting. Everybody blames the parents and blames the upbringing. But the fact is, first point I'm saying is, that boy came into this world programmed with his own tendencies, with his own psychosis, with his own misery, with his own wish to kill many people, with his intense karma with these people. That had nothing even to do with his upbringing. That's already there. Hitler didn't learn his stuff from his mum. It was already in his mind from intense past stuff. And that's a big... So in other words, it's a massive point that we do not factor in the West. We tend to think it's even the thinking you've got, which is automatic, comes from the mummy and daddy or comes from the culture. So you come into this world already with what you've got in there, and then depending on the karma you've got, it's going to be reinforced by whatever you hear from mummy, daddy, God, or whatever else, So what I'm getting at, the real point is, the stuff that we come programmed with is so instinctive. That little boy who had compassion for the lice. No one taught him that. Some people go, oh, he must be an old soul. We don't know what else. Don't know how to explain it. The other kid who loved fishing. Oh, that's just natural. He's a little boy. Of course, he loves fishing. So what I'm getting at is we don't realise that's coming from a series of assumptions in their own minds, which is from past habits. So already these assumptions, these viewpoints are richly ingrained in our mind already. And we don't ever think we have an assumption. That little boy who automatically cried with compassion for lice, he just did it spontaneously because he'd programmed himself with compassion. The other little boy just fell in love with fishing. He didn't think it was a viewpoint. He didn't think he was going, well, there I see some interesting creatures over there and I think it looks very delicious to kill them and I want to kill them because I've got a past karma as a result of killing and it triggers my attachment and gives me a very nice feeling. Of course, this must be an elaborate set of assumptions here. I ought to question them. Ha, ha, ha. Of course we don't do that. So already our minds are we are already completely programmed, and to the point that we don't even know that they're thoughts. We just think, oh, this is how I am. This is natural. Like some kid who is craving to have sex with a dog, you know. I mean, like whatever the karma might be. We don't think it's a concept. We don't think it's a story. We just think it's a feeling. So already we're so programmed, and what they are programmed with a series of conceptual stories that we've practiced so long it gets to the level of just being natural for us. So to begin to unpack and start to even question how we respond to things, not just the feeling level, but to realise the feeling is simply the symptom, the indicator of the elaborate story that's beneath the feeling. That's a surprise to us. So all of this comes down to learning to see our minds. Questioning everything we think, questioning everything we feel, questioning the way we interpret the world, opening our minds, ripping it to pieces, unpacking everything. It's a massive job. And that can only go one step at a time. But we've got to be conscious that that's what we have to do. Question our assumptions, analyse things, look at things, understand. I mean, it's massive. It's a massive job. Isn't it? Yeah.
You worked in prison so much. I just had this image of a courtroom. Sorry. I just had this image of a courtroom where the judge actually sort of said, look, this person has past karma. That's why they've done this terrible crime. I mean, it's a bizarre sort of thought, but...
Yeah, I mean, if you had a Buddhist country with Buddhist judges, this would be factoring into it, and then coming from much more compassion, you'd understand why the person did it, and you'd have prisons where you could, be protected from doing harm because your imprint's very strong, and you'd have practices where you could help people purify their karma and have compassion. It'd be quite a reasonable place, a reasonable country to live in, wouldn't it? That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Hi. Just on what this gentleman was saying kind of rose something for me. Does it work in reverse where if you're attached to a story that's more good or compassionate? So I'm very attached to the story of not killing, like it's obviously a tendency hearing you speak. Yeah. And I was vegan for about 5 years, but had to break it because of some health issues.
I understand you.
Yeah, and I struggle with that every time.
Right. Because you're involved with using the products of animals' lives, you mean? Basically.
Yeah. Like it feels. I don't feel that that I have more value over an animal.
I understand.
So to participate in that, it just doesn't gel. So is that a level of attachment as well, even though it's...
Okay. Until we're highly realised, we've got attachment. So if the attachment's stronger than the virtue, then we're a really horrible person. If the attachment's less strong, is there, but it still pollutes our virtue, so it's still going to be there. So it's always going to be there. But obviously you're talking about having compassion. There's some imprint in your mind from the past that causes you to not want to be involved in doing things that are using the products of animals' lives. Yeah. So that's from compassion. But of course you can be attached. Many vegans and vegetarians are very fanatic, very fundamentalist, very attached. Yeah. It's embarrassing how attached they are. It's terrible. And you know what? It's kind of interesting because, I never ever had... Vegans and vegetarians never ever ask the question of, please would you tell me the karma about wearing a leather belt? It's always about eating meat, or because we're attached to food, you see. Because we're attached to food, then that attachment turns over into our particular political position and becomes a fanatic position. I'm not saying yours is, but we never ask about wearing leather belts. People always say, oh, if you eat meat, you're as bad as the fisherman. But I never noticed people demonstrating outside the fishing rod factory. I never noticed people, saying you're as bad as the fisherman. I never noticed people saying, well, the person who made the gun in the factory is the same as the murderer. No one ever says that. It's only because we're attached to food in particular. It's a big, big drama for our minds that we get caught up in all the business, So, also it's a really interesting topic to think about too. Because again, there's two issues here. The fact is, on one side, which your question is bringing up for me, okay? So you didn't want to say more than that. You happy?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's an interesting topic because we do get very fundamentalist about this stuff. Some people, right. So I remember one time, a couple of years ago, I think I was in England. I eat cheese and things. And I remember this, I went to this amazing cheese stop, and I bought this kick-ass cheddar. So I had a picture, and a friend of mine, Sarah, does a Facebook page for me. I don't look at it and anything. She does the page and sends me messages and things. But I remember I put a picture of me buying this kick-ass cheddar. Well, all these fundamentalist vegans and vegans got very upset. How dare a Buddhist nun eat cheese? All these lectures, because people get very fundamentalist. Well, I didn't want to be political. I didn't want to say anything. But I Googled and always wondered how many creatures got slaughtered on the road when you drive cars, So I didn't want to be political, but sure enough, you Google something, you're going to find this person's done it. So some Dutch fellow has done some research of just on the number plate and a certain period, a road in a certain period. It's like trillions every day. It's like inconceivable number of sentient beings get slaughtered just on the number plate. So I just put that story on, Then the fundamentalists, well, you mean we're going to stop driving cars? I didn't say anything because I refrained from saying vegans and vegetarians drive cars. Then I put another story on. This Victorian ABC scientist got sort of fed up with all the fundamentalist vegans and vegetarians complaining. So he found this, he discovered there was this wheat field in Victoria, it must be common for all wheat fields, where they grow wheat. Of course, 25% is to feed the bulls for the meat eaters, but the other is for the vegetarians and the vegans. And, he said in the off-season when there's no wheat growing, millions of these cute little field mice gather. He had pictures of them. He said they sing love songs to each other. They're the cutest little things. And he had photos. And then he said, of course, when they have to grow the wheat, what do? They slaughter the millions of field mice. And even vegetarians, with eggs. It's monstrous what they do because they now breed chickens only for eggs and chickens for eating. So all the millions of male chicks in the egg factories, they're sent on this little conveyor belt and they go into this machine that mangles them. It's like this monstrous torture. Millions of little male chicks, all cute little things they go along this conveyor belt and they end up in this being splattered. Because they're not commercially viable. Our industries are monstrous, monstrous. So that's even for eggs. So you can't win. So the bigger picture here is very interesting. The bigger picture one, Buddha's saying, the very nature of our lives is that samsara is completely involved in suffering. That just by existing, we harm each other. Our bodies are walking zoos. Like Buddha would say, there's not an atom of space you won't find sentient beings. That literally by existing, we are harming sentient beings. Billions in our bodies, under our armpits, in our face, in the air, all the dust mites. We're slaughtering each other just by existing. So this is why, and this is due to the negative karma. It's so intense. We're all caught up in this. So it's like a no-win. So what are you going to do about this? This is why vows are said to be so unbelievably important. What we can do is start with the pure, sincere intention motivated by compassion to at least, when you meet a living being that you recognize as a living being, try not to harm it. What more can we do, We can't do more than that. So even if you're a vegan, even if you don't eat, you're still harming sentient beings. We can't win, So there's no point in despairing. At least we have the intention, and then even more powerfully, you live in a vow never to kill, which means 24 hours a day you're living in that vow. You're creating so much virtue. So it's sort of like a beacon that guides us out of our own samsara, life after life. And what else can we do? But we've got to recognize that with great humility, that just by existing, I don't care if you eat meat or anything, you're slaughtering countless creatures. There's no question. So within that, we do our best. So even if a person decides to eat meat, I'm not going to be fundamentalist about it, excuse me. For me, even the way we are so fundamentalist, and often vegans and vegetarians become like, they go, oh, that's disgusting, take that meat away. Well, excuse me, that's not a virtuous thought, that's anger. And that's complaining, criticising other people like you're so holy, It's really inappropriate. I mean, if you're a vegetarian, you go to your grandma's house and she feeds you a lamb chop, excuse me, have the humility to eat it. What do you think you're doing? I mean, it's so shocking how we get so strict about it. Of course be vegetarian, unbelievable. But again, there's two things, you see. One is the karma you create. Out of a pure motivation of compassion to not want to eat meat or wear leather belts or wear shoes, wow, how fantastic. You are the beneficiary. Don't think animals are the beneficiary. Excuse me, that's beyond naive. But we think that, because I don't eat fish, somehow less fish are getting killed. Don't be ridiculous. We don't, I mean, this doesn't mean, oh, well, it doesn't matter, I'll eat meat. That's not the point. There's two things. One, there's the karma of the creature, and whether or not actually the numbers of creatures getting killed is less. And two, the karma you create. But the reason in the beginning to be vegetarian is for your sake. Do not doubt it. Please, excuse me, do not doubt. The way the world is so complex with the, you know, you can see with the way the world is, with all the industries. It's incredibly subtle. I mean, if you're living in a village and they kill a goat, and although they won't kill a goat if you don't eat meat, then you can really see the impact of not eating meat. Isn't it? But, you know, and the other thing that we don't factor in the West, we really do believe in the West that it's all about demand. So there's less demand, there's less killing. It's just simply not true. And I'll tell you why. For two reasons. First, because of the complexity of the whole, the way the world is now. But second, and because of all the monstrous industries, like, you know, you understand, the big fat market of killing everything. But the other one is, we don't factor this in, there's the karma of the sentient beings who have the karma to have the killing jobs. And secondly, it's the karma of those chickens, those dogs, those fish, to be born as a fish, to be born as a chicken. And who do you think that is? The previous killers, you know, what else? So I remember one time in Maine where they do lobsters, you know. And one season, for some reason, there was a report, I remember reading in the Boston paper. Nobody ordered any more lobsters, but one season, all of a sudden, for no logical reason, 4 times or 10 times, I forget, more lobsters turned up in the waters of Maine. So initially the fishermen were excited, they wanted more money, but the prices collapsed. The Maine state government had to do millions of dollars of marketing to sell these lobsters. My point is, nobody ordered more lobsters. So that's the karma of sentient beings to be born as lobsters, to get slaughtered, you know. So even if you stop ordering the lambs, I bet you they'll have a glut of lambs in the fridge factories in New Zealand until such time as they do marketing to sell more lambs. So it's much more complex than merely demand, which doesn't mean you shouldn't try to be vegetarian. Of course, for your sake though, truly it's for your sake, and at least try to increase the numbers to lessen the suffering of sentient beings, you know, of course. But don't be naive about it, and don't be fundamentalist about it. It's your own damn, it's your private business. You understand? It's so rude, and we get so rude about this because we're attached to food. That's why I say nobody ever goes on about, no one ever asks me, again, the same thing I always say about nobody asks about why the good things happen. In all the years I've been a Buddhist, nobody ever asks about wearing leather belts. It's always about eating meat. You hear one point? Because we're attached to food. Because food's an obsession with us. So we get very kind of caught up in it, you know. I mean, you still not eat meat, but there's so many things we do that are affecting other people's lives, and certainly animals. So many products, so many things, medicines, everything. Animal stuff is used in so many things. It's just this pervasive society we live in, you know. So being aware of that, and then having compassion, and then when you do eat meat, or you do wear a leather belt, or you do wear leather shoes, you say a mantra, and you blow on those shoes, and you blow on that leather belt, or you blow on that lamb chop. And the creature whose body that was will get some blessing, Lama Zopa says. So at least you do something for the creature, you know. And eat that lamb chop if your grandma offers it to it. Be humble. Because aversion is not virtue. Take that away, that's disgusting. It's not disgusting. A rotten carrot is the same as a rotten piece of flesh, please. Excuse me, calm down. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
What's the end of the world? You got to go to hell or something? I mean, it's so fundamentalist, in my opinion. But have the wish not to harm sentient beings. That's powerful. Living a vow not to kill is infinitely more powerful for you and other sentient beings than eating a lamb chop occasionally. You're not going to be conscious of who you're eating and how, you know. Like, don't order or sit in the factory you go to the restaurant where I know in Spain recently, or last year or whatever, Italy I forget. Italy. We go to the cafe and I sit down and there's suddenly the pond, you know, the pool with the lobsters in it, right next to me. Like, oh God, you know, I said, can we buy them all? No, we can only buy them if we kill them, so I don't want to do that, you know. So then when the guy wasn't there, I didn't know what to do, these poor lobsters. So I when he wasn't watching, I got some water, then I did some mantras and I spat in the water and then I threw it into the pool to bless the lobsters with a mantra. That's the best I could do. What can I do, And one time I remember in Florida, I went to the supermarket and there was all this, in the meat section, with all these lobsters. So I tried to do some mantras and blow in the water, then I walked out and I thought, how can I leave these lobsters? I just met them. I've got some karma and they're my lobsters, So I had to go back, so we bought buckets, put water in it, we bought all the lobsters. The guy was so moved by this, he gave us a good discount, And then he said, this old lobster will be dead very soon, you don't need to buy him, he'll be dead anyway. So then we did mantras, and then we released them and did prayers and circumambulated them but then of course I couldn't go back to it because I'd meet more lobsters and I didn't have the money. You do what you can, you do what you can. Yeah.
No, I want to ask about,
Microphone here. Go on.
It was when you're talking about vegetarians, that people that, they make a conscious decision to be a vegetarian or
a vegan. Yeah.
And some of them turn their pet animals into the same.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Okay, well I guess that's up to them.
Yeah, of course. And it's wonderful, but still, it's not that much help for an animal. There's no big deal for an animal.
So with the pets,
yeah.
I might eat a vegetarian meal for the day, but I'm giving my pets cooked chukki and stuff like that.
Right. So what
should I be saying?
So what's the question?
Well, should I be saying a mantra as I'm feeding the kittens?
Well, of course you could. Of course you can. Anything.
Okay.
At least, given that we just existing, we slaughter other beings. We be conscious and we do what we can to mitigate what we do. Of course you can. So Lama Zopa says. Lama Zopa says even a bone that's 1,000 years old, there's a very strong connection between that body and the consciousness whose body it was. Wherever that consciousness is now, Lama Zopa says mantra is so powerful. That's, it's up to you to decide that if it's true. By saying it, you bless your breath or your spit, and you blow on that bone, and the consciousness gets some benefit. Just being grateful to the being is not good for you. Doesn't help the being. So it's doing something for yourself, which is why you're vegetarian. Don't underestimate that. You are the beneficiary. Believe me, not animals. Not the way the world is. You're the beneficiary, but we really have a fantasy because we don't eat it. And this is my point to you. They're still getting slaughtered out there very happily, please. Your little thing is a dint in them, but doesn't mean you can't try. But the real beneficiary is us, out of compassion, wishing not to be involved. It's compassion that makes our karma virtuous. But still, you can even argue, if you eat meat occasionally with compassion, think of the being and say mantra, how can that be negative? You just can't say it is, It's much more nuanced, again, as we tend to think it is, And don't have aversion for it. That's just your own neurosis. Like, take that meat away from me, that's disgusting. Don't cook meat in my house. That's kind of neurotic, Do you understand? Be reasonable, But don't, it's sort of like, because we're so attached to food, we'll go, oh, you mean it's okay, I might as well eat meat. No! Watch your mind. Take responsibility. Don't, like you're saying, don't lie to yourself. Don't fool yourself, And the reason it's good to give up eating meat is because the attachment. Listen, my taste in food in this life, if I want a meal, I want a piece of steak, meat. I haven't eaten fruit hardly in 30 years. I eat a grape every now and again, I don't care about fruit. I mean it, and I'm still healthy, look at me. All this business, you've got to have fruits and all this business, I like veggies. When I want to eat a good meal, I eat veggies. But if you ask me what I like, give me meat, chocolate, ice cream. That is my favourite food. Not fruit is boring. Vegetables are boring. I mean it sincerely now. So of course for me it is really good not to eat meat because I'm attached to it. For my mind, for my practice, of course it's good for me to not eat meat, I'm the beneficiary there. Don't argue about that. You see my point? But I wear leather shoes. So I have to, remember the kind beings who gave me my blue leather shoes. No other leather anywhere, I don't think. They're the only leather thing. I don't wear them. Well, actually, this is not leather. I've been a nun 40 years, and that's or Buddhist 40 years. Sorry, nun 38, and that's my second belt ever. I have a very cheap clothing belt. It's my only set of robes, I don't carry any spare clothes around, just one set of robes.
Do you have to change the knot every now and then?
Yeah, when I get fat and thin, yeah. I'm losing a few kilos now because I've got to be ready for the Laudo trek next year. So I've got to lose a few kilos so it gets the bow gets bigger because I get, it expands. Yeah. Go on. Yeah.
Before we were talking about the 3 different types of suffering, being the
suffering of change, all-pervasive.
So can you tell us a bit more about the suffering of change?
Yeah, I will.
And also the
pervasive? All-pervasive, yeah. So the suffering of change, simply speaking, simply speaking, the whole discussion we had so far, we said the first kind of suffering, which is when the bad things happen, and then I said, now let's look at how that can help us understand having compassion for others who have the bad things happen. But let's expand our group of people whom we're going to have compassion for by understanding the second kind of suffering. Are you with me, people? Yeah. By understanding our own suffering. So like I said, if we understand the second noble truth, which is the causes of suffering, the two main causes are karma, the action, and then the delusion that impels it. So attachment is effectively the main cause of all of our suffering in daily life, Buddha says, which is this craving to get what I want. It causes us to then do the things that harm others. It causes us to get angry. It causes us to get jealous, and all the other dramas we do. So attachment is pretty pervasive. So understanding attachment is utterly necessary. So if we take attachment as the main source of our suffering effectively in daily life, we can look at these first two levels of suffering in relation to attachment. So like I said, if we understand how we're driven by that attachment, that craving to get what I want, then the first kind of suffering, which is the suffering of suffering, which is when the bad things happen, another way of saying it is it's when attachment doesn't get what it wants. So, if you and I have a relationship and you're attached to me being on time and I'm attached to you saying the nice words and you're attached to me going to the movie you like, typical ordinary people, then as soon as I want something else, you'll get annoyed with me. As soon as you don't do what I like, I'll get annoyed with you. It's because our attachment isn't getting what it wants. So then even when it's mild level, like I don't want to go to that movie, you talk too much, that's the suffering of suffering, because it's what attachment doesn't want. Of course, if you punch me in the nose, it's even worse. And if you kill me, it's even worse. But there's just levels and levels of suffering. It's when the bad things happen, isn't it? So that's when attachment doesn't get what it wants. Now, the second kind of suffering is when attachment does get what it wants, and that's what we call happiness. So what we call happiness, which is effectively what Buddha's saying is when attachment gets what it wants, is what he calls a subtler level of suffering. So to understand that, let's go into it now and see why what we call happiness is actually a subtler level of suffering. Do you understand? And to do that, all the talk we've had so far is informing this, but now we've really got to understand the suffering of attachment and how it functions in our daily life, which is very difficult to see. Okay, so the simple example is the chocolate cake. So we know if you go to you're attached to chocolate cake, which means you over-exaggerate chocolate cake's deliciousness. You over-exaggerate chocolate cake's ability to make you happy. You believe it's the source of your happiness. You think about it when it's not there. You understand? That's one of the things about attachment is one of the signs of attachment is you think about the object when it's not there. Well, look at us with food, most of us. You're unusual if you're not attached to food. We think about it when it's not there. We think about it when we haven't got it. We think about what we will have, what we won't have, how much we'll have. We'll have this, now I'll have that, and we'll change this. And we never stop thinking about food. Because it's one of the signs of attachment. If you're in love with somebody, you never stop day and night thinking about them. It's obvious. Attachment is one of the signs is you're thinking about, yearning for, hankering after that object when it's not there. It's clear, Attachment also has the function of over-exaggerating the deliciousness of the chocolate cake. Attachment has the function, is coming from the feeling of something missing, which is dissatisfaction, which is the basic energy of attachment, which is what causes us to go to get the chocolate cake in the first place. So all of this is the multifaceted function of this attachment. You with me? You recognise? Yes. Okay. So for us, this is called getting the things you want so you get happy, isn't it? Finding the husband, finding the job, finding the handbag, finding the body shape you like. This is what we spend our lives doing. Do we not agree? Mm-hmm. In general. And we consider it normal behaviour. And it is normal behaviour. But Buddha says it's attachment. And so it's fraught. Because the point is this, as long as we get what attachment wants, that's when we're happy, isn't it? Fred comes on time, you be nice to me, you take me to the movie I like, you're sweet to me, you never argue with me, you're my best friend. Of course I'm going to be happy. Because you're doing everything I want. That's called attachment. But the more I have this attachment, one of its functions is expectation. And I have it's very strong expectation. And it means you'd better do what I want every moment if you're going to be my friend. And because it's also a symptom of a very fragile person, attachment is very neurotic. Then the second you turn up late, you talk about things I don't want to talk about, you want to go to the movie, I don't want to go, I get upset, don't I? Don't you agree? Yes. So that's called aversion. That's called aversion. Aversion, which really turns into anger when it's really horrible. Well, that's the first kind of suffering, is anger. But the reason I have anger, which is the first kind of suffering, is because I had attachment in the first place. Yeah. So, I go to, you and I go to have chocolate cake. We're all excited. We look like we just enjoyed chocolate cake. It looks like, oh wow, chocolate cake's the cause of our happiness. We get all excited. The anticipation's there, the eagerness. We get there, we order it. And then what happens when carrot cake comes? Look what happens, you know. So the story's building up and demands, definitely expects the chocolate cake, guaranteed. And then the shock when chocolate cake comes. You understand my point? So the suffering of suffering is getting what attachment doesn't want. That's now the suffering of suffering, isn't it? A mild version. But the suffering of change is when I get the chocolate cake because I'm fooling myself into believing it's the cause of my happiness. But let's look at that. Let's say the chocolate cake does come and I'm so excited, anticipating, waiting for it. Attachment exaggerates, it's delicious. I put it in the mouth and I'm waiting for happiness to come, aren't I? And then it's so delicious. This is what happens. Observe your mind. You can't, even before you finish the first mouthful, it's so delicious. It is delicious. No one argues it's not delicious. It is, and that's a moment of happiness. It's true that eating the cake does trigger a moment of happiness. It's guaranteed. Buddha doesn't argue with that. But what happens is this. Why do you go for the second mouthful? Why do you go for the third one? And the fourth, and the second piece, and the third piece? Because your stomach's getting fuller, but the mind is not satisfied yet. And there's this belief of attachment that when I get the cake I'll get happy, which means get satisfied. Which means at some point you should be able to stop and say, wow, that's blissful, I'm so happy. But what happens? The more I'm attached to cake, the more I shove it in, right? Isn't it? The more I'm anticipating happiness. But then what happens? The second piece, the third piece, and gradually it begins to change, does it not, into the suffering of suffering. Because now I'm going to be having a stuffed stomach. I want to vomit. If I look at the cake now, how does it look? Completely disgusting, right? Now that's called the suffering of suffering. Isn't it? Having a full stomach. So where did the suffering of suffering come from? Having attachment in the first place. So suffering of change is simply what looks like happiness. But literally, logically, the more we analyse when things are done on the basis mainly of attachment, it is fraught with a nightmare because it only leads to the suffering of suffering. The more I'm attached to you being on time, the more likely you are to be even a minute late, the more I'll freak out. The more attachment I have that food will make me happy, the more I'll vomit because I want to keep eating it. The more I'm attached to Fred being the cause of all my happiness, we'll be together till we're 80, and he leaves me for a younger version, the more devastated I'll be. So the suffering of attachment, the suffering caused by attachment, is what we call happiness, but actually it leads inexorably to the suffering of suffering. You can't have the suffering of suffering without having attachment first. They're utterly linked to each other. You can't win with them. Do you recognise that?
Yeah, I do.
So then, the suffering of suffering looks like that's what suffering is, and we spend our lives trying to avoid it, getting the cake we want. But we sort of forget. You see, every time we remember the chocolate cake, you forget the feeling of acid reflux when you get it. You forget feeling too full. You forget wanting to vomit. You forget the unhappy feeling. We forget the indigestion. We only remember the pleasure, and then we run to get the cake again. We're so stupid. Do you understand? I mean, really, we are so stupid. But we forget, because we're junkies, you see. Attachment's junkie. When you look at a person who's an alcoholic or a junkie, and excuse me, we're all that. We know it's true when you're in the midst of it, but the craving is so strong, we know we are imprisoned in it. And we know that the pathetic, even when you're really too much, even when you're eating, like you see this drive, you just shove the food in. How can you call that pleasure? You're like an animal. It's like Lama Yeshe says, attachment makes you like dull. Even when it's just food. And you know you're full. You know you don't want anything, but you feel this awful sense sometimes at night, especially at night, attachment energy time, And what's missing? I'm dissatisfied. What do I want? I'll have a cake. You don't even want a piece of cake. You eat it, oh, see what happens. It feels revolting. Are we communicating here? And when you're an alcoholic, it's completely obvious. It's like a nightmare. Being the junkie. I remember watching one of those, those shows in America where you have all these extreme people, like a 600-pound weight and all this. And you see it. I mean, we're all the same. There's no difference. But I remember this one little girl, she was like 600 pounds weight, but little. And it was clear, you saw her eyes, her face, even her stomach was cut away, she only had, put in 3 things into it. You could still see this, she was like a junkie basically, there's no difference. She would start like wolfing the food down, her eyes looked vacant and lost and despairing. It's the same as being an alcoholic, the same as being a junkie for whatever it is. But this is attachment energy. And the more we see our mind, the more we see an ordinary life, it's running rampant. It's like a nightmare. It's not meant to be negative. It's very hard. We've got to see it ever more, ever more. So the more we understand the way attachment works, but all it does is there is no question. You see, this is the tricky part. there is no question that the object of attachment definitely triggers a very pleasant feeling in the beginning, only in the beginning. It's like downhill from there. Think of sex, and excuse me being gross here, even the best sex in the universe. You can't even imagine such bliss. We know maybe we've been, been in love or something. Unbelievable. The joy, the bliss, the person looks divine, the whole world looks divine, the whole world is sparkling. You can't believe that the bliss, the anticipation, the gorgeous, the love, finally I've found all this business. Now, excuse me being very rude, but this is my point. Everything leads to having that contact with that body, doesn't it? The first time. Now, excuse me, keep having sex. I don't mean go to sleep and get hungry again the next day, but have sex and then have sex again. And then have sex again, please. And then don't stop. Keep having sex. And I mean keep having sex. What will happen eventually? You'll become so repulsed. Would you not? It will be the most repulsive idea in the whole world because you're completely exhausted. Are we communicating here? So then if we can remember that too much cake, too many bodies, too much music, too much money, you keep having it. The same thing that we totally believe is the cause of happiness becomes the source of the most grotesque suffering. This is scientific truth, but we just can't stand to hear it because we're junkies, basically. Are we communicating?
Yes.
This is hard to hear because it feels mean of Buddha to point this out. Like, what am I supposed to do here, How can I get pleasure otherwise? Because the fact is, this is where all-pervasive suffering comes in. This is very abstract for us because it implies a whole different worldview. We've got this body of 5 senses, 5 holes, with attachment that craves to fill them, let's face it. From eons of attachment, Buddha says, that we've literally, it's like karmic evolution, we created the cause to actually get born in a body looking like a bunch of apes on a planet shared by the apes with 5 holes that crave feeding. And there's no choice about it. To survive, we need to fulfill desires, cravings. Even one day of not fulfilling desires, cravings to get the sensory experiences, we'd go mad. This is all pervasive suffering. So in other words, using the analogy of being a junkie, the suffering of suffering is when you don't get what attachment wants. It's the nightmare of not getting, the nightmare of not having what attachment wants, the nightmare of getting the bad things, the nightmare of not getting the junk. To suffering, having the bad things happen. Then the next level of suffering is the suffering of getting what attachment wants, the honey-covered razor blade. We call it happiness, but it's nothing other than suffering. And the third kind of suffering is being born in the first place in a body, which is the body of a junkie with 5 senses that demand their junk, in a world constructed of junk, the 5 sense objects, that in order to survive we are compelled to ingest them. So that's the all-pervasive suffering. There's no choice but to live as a junkie, having a body of a junkie, driven by desire. Can you kind of hear that? Yeah. I mean, we can't see outside this because as far as we're concerned, we're just humans and that's how it is. But it's a type of rebirth, Buddha says, that's in samsara and is driven by attachment. We're living in a desire realm, he says. So to understand attachment the way Buddha talks, I mean, this is really not being, again, rude, but in this conference I went to in Sydney last week, there was a Muslim, a Christian, and they were talking about sexual attachment, sexual activity, Talk about marriage, that kind of business. And they all talked. This is how people talk. I'm not being rude. The Jesuit priest, it's a complete mystery. No one understands sexual activity. No one, it's a mystery. Because, they even talk about it as a gift from God. And I'm not being sarcastic here. Well, this is the point in Buddhism. The key understanding is this, of desire, of attachment. It just happens to be attachment is attachment is attachment. The object is a question of object. Whether attachment to having, physical contact with a body, attachment to killing, attachment to eating, attachment to seeing things, attachment to hearing things, attachment to money, there's not a fraction of difference. Attachment is attachment is attachment. It's just that some attachment, like when it involves the body, is very strong. It triggers very nice feelings, that's all, which throws us. So it's even called a sacrament, Do you understand? Yeah. It's just attachment. And that's what Tantra is all about. It's this marvellous, sophisticated understanding of subtle physiology and psychology based upon the understanding of these delusions and the impact upon them of the body and the way they all work together so interdependently. And it's extraordinarily sophisticated, marvellous understanding of the way the human being is constructed. And of course the greatest yogis can utilise this energy and use it as a method to get enlightened, which is so sophisticated, so extraordinary. But it's not possible to understand it until we've understood what the delusions are, which is what high school is, which is how we're talking here, about suffering and the causes of suffering, you know. Yes?
Could you just share your understanding of samsara, please?
Being in samsara means being born in one of the realms of existence that Buddha would say are in samsara. Being in samsara means being born with some type of body driven by delusions to one degree or another, and there are levels, there are like suburbs in samsara. And you go from the top level of samsara, which is a subtle, where you have subtle, your physical energy is like subtle light energy, and the experiences are very blissful. And this is the fruit of lots of virtue, karmically. This is the same as the Christians and the Muslims would call heaven. Buddha would assert that's a state of being, and it's like the best suburbs in samsara. So being in samsara is determined by having these delusions that we're talking about. In particular, the root delusion, which we haven't begun to talk about, which we might, the root delusion that has this clinging to this sense of an I. So one of the key characteristic of being in samsara is having this delusion. So on the basis of that, there's attachment. On the basis of that, there's anger. On the basis of that, there's all the other delusions. On the basis of that, we harm others. So on the basis of this, we do some good things as well, and we do bad things. So karmically, over many lives, we get born as a god, which is like the best suburb in samsara, but it's still in samsara. It's like a brief respite from the grossest of sufferings. But it's an exact example of the suffering of change, where there is bliss, but it won't last. Then you got further down the road, you got the human realm, which is a lesser suburb, but still a reasonable suburb, where there's some pleasure, but still driven by these delusions. Further down, you've got the three lower realms of this samsara, which are each manifestations of the three root delusions. So the manifestation of the main delusion, called ignorance, is the animal realms, which is, again, just a state of mind driven by all these delusions, but they can't even access their virtues. They've only got delusions. They're driven by attachment, driven by craving, driven by anger, driven by rage, driven by harming each other. They live in nightmares of terror, harming and being harmed. Animals do. So that's the worst level of samsara. Further down, you've got all these beings whose minds, you could say, are conjoined with air energy, and they're completely driven by craving and grasping. They're called spirits. And even further down, the worst suburb of all is called the hell realms. And these beings are experiencing the fruits mainly of aversion and anger and harming others. So all of these states of being are mental states that come along with a certain level of physicality, all of which are the result of past actions of those sentient beings, all of whom are driven by these delusions that we're describing. So as long as we're driven by these delusions, we are in samsara, and we go from one to the next life, up and down, until we've cut the root delusion by realizing emptiness and getting wisdom, and then we cut samsara, and then we're out of samsara. Something like that.
Thank you.
All right?
It's just that easy.
What? Huh?
I said, no, it's just that easy.
Well, it is. It is. It's like that. Yes.
Robina, I'd written down this morning, and I don't know if I can articulate the question that I
Good, darling. Go on.
About being mindful.
Being what, darling? Being mindful.
Being a bit emotional.
Mm.
Identify when we're observing the mind. You know, that's what's anger, jealousy, hatred, and all that stuff. And then I've got here when the feeling hits
the body,
go deeper.
Yeah, that's right.
And in the last year, we all have different things happening in our lives.
That's right, exactly.
And I've found that with me, the emotion comes into my solar plexus at a time when I might be busily doing some activity, and I don't know what to do about it, because it almost it almost centres me, or not centres me.
A certain feeling, a certain emotion.
It's a feeling. It gets me in here. And
is it triggered by something? Has it come out of...
it's been triggered by a number of things.
Okay.
And the mind comes in, and what about this? I could have been that, and why didn't I do this? And and I must have been this person, blah, blah, blah. but it's got to me in certain stages where it's debilitated me. When I thought I was having a heart attack one
Right.
day, when I was walking, you know, the muscles in my leg, I thought I can't step forward. And so to even think about anything of Buddhism, what did I do, you know, where have I participated in this? I find that debilitating.
No, I know.
And I don't know what to do.
No,
at
no,
the
darling,
time.
all that...
Even, can I just say, just talking to you now, because I guess that, and it's probably part of me, that being able to express myself in terms of it's now affecting me here. Steve asked.
I understand, darling. I think what this is, isn't it, is it seems to me you're not an angry person. You don't shout and yell and punch, do you?
No, I don't.
Precisely.
But it arises.
No, I know, I understand. But in general, you don't. Your response in life hasn't been to shout and yell and argue with too many people. You've probably been a peacemaker, a good girl, right? Is that true?
I've always had to be a good girl.
No, but do you understand my point now?
Yes.
Would that be the kind of person you are? You seem to me
Yes.
that's. Okay, what's happening is this.
Can I just say, in between that, about 15 or 18 years ago, I used to think, I'm not an angry person because I don't do those things.
Right.
There was a situation in the workforce one day.
Yes.
I picked up the phone to ring, and the company had changed the rules to suit themselves.
Yes.
Anger, and that's when I
Well
felt
done.
it. And
I understand.
thought,
Good, darling. I understand.
that's where that anger
Okay, good,
is.
good.
Right?
So the point I think is like this, and it might sound a bit simplistic, but I think it's like this. In a sense, we can see we're all variations of the same things, and some of us get angry sometimes. Some people get very angry all the time. Some people never get angry. We're on the spectrum, aren't we? And why that is because we've all got attachment, which is craving to get what I want every second, and that means every time it doesn't get it, which is natural. If someone does what you don't like, you drop something, the noise is too loud. Aversion, a mild version of anger, which is frustration, annoyance, irritation, upset. They're very popular words, aren't they? We all use those words every day. And you'd never think it means you're angry. You just kind of get irritated, annoyed, upset. They're all versions of aversion, which is the bare bones state of mind that is the response, the millisecond attachment doesn't get what it wants. And attachment's running us every millisecond. And this is underneath, deep, we don't notice. It's just natural. Are you with me here? So now, a person like me in my life, it was easy to see when my attachment didn't get what it wanted because I'd explode and shout and kick and beat my sisters. Do you understand? But another one of my sisters wouldn't do that. She would become like passive-aggressive, or she'd become catatonic, or she'd become depressed. Because aversion, like you, so aversion is arising. Aversion's arising 1,000 times a day, but it's ever so subtle, we just don't notice. So it's especially in someone like you, we don't notice it. So therefore, because we don't notice it, we're not dealing with the situation as it happens. So you drop something as simple as dropping something. And because you're programmed to think you shouldn't drop something because mummy says you shouldn't, and we've programmed that into our mind, and I'm trying to be a good girl, and good girls don't drop things, and our minds are riddled with these assumptions. We don't realise, we've got mummy and daddy and God programmed in there, sitting on our shoulder, and we think but we've internalised it, and we're using it against ourselves every second. So all the time we're trying to live up to this fantasy view, then you drop something and you get annoyed. But you don't think, like I said, you don't rush off to your therapist, I got annoyed when I dropped a cup. Shut up and go home, Robina, But that's, if you dealt with it at that second, if we deal with these baby things underneath, if we were educated to notice these things before they exploded at the high level, like you having unable to walk or you having it here, noticing it. It's been happening 1,000 times before, but you just don't notice. So of course it's going to build up. And that's why a friend of mine has even been a Buddhist for 40 years. She's now having deep recognitions of the anger in her mind that she'd never called anger. But it's come up from underneath, And so that's why it was evident for me I had anger. I could never pretend I didn't. Do you understand? But especially if you're being a good girl, you've got a vested interest in not being a naughty girl. So you've got to suppress. It's completely natural. It's natural. It's what we do. But it's got to come out somewhere, somehow.
So how does I wrote here that we need to go deeper.
That means noticing, darling.
When it's happening to you, though, because you feel debilitated.
Listen, that's so sophisticated. To notice what we're doing as it's happening is insanely sophisticated because there's like 1,000 thoughts a second. So all we can do is start somewhere by being our own therapist, by unpacking our assumptions, by noticing what we're thinking, by noticing what we're doing, and we just get better and better and better at it, hopefully. And that means, so one of the key practices, And I mean, I'm really not joking when I say you just drop something, you get annoyed. And I'd say to myself, it's all right, Robina, drop another thing. It doesn't matter. So instead of just, you get annoyed, that's a moment. You see, Buddha would say, no matter what we think or do or say, nothing goes astray. Everything gets programmed. So it's always going to come out at some point. So if we are able to deal with things when they arise, think ideally. The ideal scenario, since you're a little girl, if you've been educated, to deal with things when they arise and confront it and avert it. Confront the aversion, notice you get annoyed, and then, oh, that's not just aversion, that's just attachment not getting what it wants, but that's okay. It's okay to drop something. I'm not a bad girl. I said relax. So then you just dealt with it. I'm talking really simplistically here. Then how can anything build up? You know, fear and panic is just because we haven't been able to look at stuff. And this is completely natural. It's natural. So we've got to know it's like this in theory. And then more and more we unpack and unravel, look at our assumptions, look at our mind, do our own analysis every day, and then more and more having courage in the face of things that attachment doesn't like. The mean person, the thing the boss did. In the beginning it takes a while to get to the point to confront it because it's either deny or me punch. You know, you've got to work on it. It's really intense. So then dealing with things when they happen, seeing it for what it is, not living in denial of it, then there won't be anything stored in. I mean, when you're really advanced, that's how we'll be. Nothing will deter us. You know, we'll be like the Dalai Lama. Nothing turns him off. Nothing gets him down. Nothing. We can see it because he's fully developed in this job. So there's infinite bliss, no fear. Absolutely, they're fearless because fear is a function of all these delusions. People often ask, "Where's fear in Buddhist psychology?" You never notice it's not laid out as one of the many states of mind because all the delusions are in the nature of fear. Fear is their taste. Really. So when you've finally uprooted the root delusion, which believes in the fantasy I, when you've uprooted that one, that's the realization of emptiness. As Lama Zopa says, now there is no fear. This is insane to think this. Do you understand? So it's slowly, darling, and greeting the problems, not being afraid of the problems, greeting it, seeing it for what it is, seeing all the shitty stuff in our minds, not being scared of it, confronting it, dealing with it internally. Then we become courageous and brave, and then it won't be stored away, you know. I mean, slowly, this stuff's very advanced to get to the point where we really have gone beyond it. Do you understand? Does that make sense? I think it's to understand attachment and aversion at a much subtler level, not just when you explode level, not like that, or when not like that. It's much more subtle and more nuanced. It's there all the time, subtly. Do you understand? So all what we're doing here is we're talking the wisdom wing, but the more we can see this here, the more compassion we can have there. So clear. This is the point. Once you've got it down for yourself, it means you've got compassion for yourself, then it is not even difficult to have compassion for others because you realise they're in the same boat. But to try, without doing this in the inner world, to try to have compassion for the pedophile right now, without doing this work in yourself, it's too hard. We can't because we don't understand why they're a pedophile. It's got strong attachment to sex, that's all. Jumping on little girls and boys, whatever the reason is from the past life. And you understand they're driven. Just all you've got to do, my feeling is, look at your own attachment. Look at your own neuroses. Then just try to put yourself in the mind of a person who wants to jump on little girls and thinks about it all day. Can you imagine the torture? I mean, can you imagine the nightmare? Right there. But we've got to be prepared to do that and have compassion. But our trouble is, as soon as we say compassion, we get all gooey. And we think it means, oh, the poor thing, he can't help it. No. It's got nothing to do with anything. You have incredible compassion because the person is addicted to sex and past lives and jumping on dogs all the time because he's been a dog. Whatever, Must be nightmare. And you see why they're doing what they do. Once you know about your own delusions and what drives you to do your ridiculous things, then you know what drives other people. And then you can have compassion. And then, of course, you put the fellow in jail. Protect him from harming others, Of course you do. That's compassion. Not the poor thing can't help it. That's naive. That's stupid. It comes with wisdom. So that's when you see, so first of all we have to get the first understanding of suffering. The first kind is when the suffering is suffering. Then you have understanding for all the people who get harmed and the harmers. Now you can have compassion for all of them. Now you start looking at all the people who have happy lives and rich and famous, the 1% and all this. That's due to their past generosity. Delight for them, rejoice in them, rejoice that they've got so much money and so much beauty and so much power and so much this and that because of their past virtue. But now you have compassion for them because you see they're like vampires attached to it. And identify with it and have arrogance. Well, guess who they're going to be next life? Born as a smelly little person in an Indian village with $1 a year. Not complaining about India, I'm just talking. You know? You can only have compassion. When you see the white fundamentalist racist, don't be surprised who's going to be the black person next life being abused. Stop joking. There's a lovely story of Shariputra, Buddha's disciple, who's clairvoyant, all these things, doing his arms round. And he walks, goes past this village, and he goes something like, the son nurses his enemy while he eats his mother, he eats his father, and he kicks his mother, who eats her husband's bones. What a farce samsara is. So what he saw with his clairvoyance was this fellow was nursing the baby who was the reincarnation of the bloke he killed because he'd raped his wife. And because of his attachment to his wife, he got born as the baby. So there he is nursing his cute little baby, you know, who was his past enemy whom he killed. He's eating the fish that is the reincarnation of his mother or his father, because he was attached to killing the fish in the back pond, and so he was now born as a fish and he's eating his daddy. And he's kicking the dog, who's his mother, because she was attached to that place, so got born a dog there, who's eating her husband's bones. Now, I mean, if the view of reincarnation is the way the world is, then this is how it would be, obviously. So it's like what a farce samsara is, indeed. Because it's a huge view, you know, because it's an insane view. It's like a joke. I mean, it's a completely hysterical view. It's a complete joke in the Western world to talk this way, you know. This is Buddha's observation. So if you understand that, right there's not a single sentient being you would not have compassion for. It's just obvious. It's a completely no-brainer, you know. But the basis of this compassion is the understanding that sentient beings don't realise that we are harming ourselves. That's the worst one. That's the nightmare. We're like schizophrenic, insane people looking out there wondering what's causing all the suffering. We don't realise we caused it. We created it. This is Lama Zopa says the world is our karmic appearance. However things appear to us, whatever happens to us, we created it. We are the architects of it, you know. That's the worst nightmare. And then taking on board this view brings unbelievable accountability. It stops anger. It's very shocking, you know. I remember in 2003, I always tell this story, when I was went to Richard Gere, as you know, as a Buddhist. He invited the Dalai Lama to New York, and he also invited 20 former prisoners, all of whom had done some kind of meditation in prison, and people like me who are working with people in prison, so we got invited, you know. And there's this cross-section of Americans, you know, Puerto Rican and black and white and male and female and so on. And so it was a very moving day, all day talking about their experiences, their suffering, the racism, the sexism, the politics, the dramas, you know. But he also invited 2 young Tibetan nuns who'd been tortured and sexually abused in prison. I don't know, a couple of years or something. So they're telling their experiences. So I think, first of all, it was shocking to the Americans that these young women, and they probably could have concluded that maybe their suffering was worse than everybody else's, but it was very clear to the Americans that these 2 young women weren't angry. Now this is massive. This is the point about unpacking our assumptions. We don't think anger is based on an assumption. That sounds hilarious. We think it's a feeling. We think it's natural. We think it's a feeling. And we think it's a natural response when something bad happens. We think that's natural, don't we? That's how we talk about it. But we're not unpacking the assumption. We're not unpacking the philosophical position that anger has. So what does anger say? It says, how dare you do that to me? I don't deserve it. Wouldn't you agree that's what anger's saying? So when you hear that word, that's a philosophical position. Well, Buddha says, don't be silly. So that those Tibetan nuns, having the view of karma, that was their world view. They got brought up with it. That was the basis of their practice. So when they were having the torture and the raping or whatever happened, they had their way of interpreting why it was happening. So when they have an interpretation of why it's happening, of course they wouldn't be saying, how dare you do this to me, I don't deserve it. That does not arise in their mind. They don't have the philosophical position of anger. They don't have anger. That's why. But we think it must be suppressing something because we think anger is natural. We're not analysing the philosophical position that it's speaking. And everything we say, this is Buddha's point. Everything we think, everything we feel is based upon a position, a conceptual story. And the stories that we've got very strongly, like anger, when I was a little girl, it was natural. No one taught me to think this way. I'd programmed myself with this from past lives. So I fell into this pattern straight away. How dare you do that to me? I don't deserve it, I said. Because I'd programmed myself with that philosophical view. So I can say one of the main reasons now, if I've done any change, and still, I'm volatile, you can see. But one of the main reasons I would say for why I don't get angry with the things I used to get angry with is because I've suppressed it. Because I now interpret the situations differently. Literally. Do you understand? So anger just disappears. Of course it does. Because it's a philosophical position. All the emotions are based on viewpoints. And this is shocking to us. So, these young women, of course they didn't have anger. They didn't suppress it. They just didn't have the question, why is this happening to me? They had an answer. In just the same way as this Muslim mummy and daddy whose daughter went down with that Air Asia flight. Remember a few years ago? Malaysian flight. And they all drowned. And they were asked, how do you feel about the death of your daughter? And they were devoted Muslims. So their philosophical position was that God made the universe, it's God's plan, and so they said she belongs to God. He has taken her back. We are happy. Now that's a philosophical position, wouldn't you agree? But look at the consequence. They were happy. Well, go and believe in God if it's going to make you happy. I don't care. The deeper point is what's true and what's not. That's another discussion. But what you think inside will inform how you respond. Of course it will. So of course there's so much anger in our culture because the materialist world doesn't have a view of why things happen. That's of course why we ask, why is bad things happening? That's why we all have so much anxiety and depression and anger. It is logical and natural because the materialist world doesn't have an explanation. Can you see my point? It's so obvious, It's so clear. So we have to unpack. This is Buddha's point. Everything we do with our body and our speech is informed by conceptual stories in our mind. That's it. It's just they're really subtle and intuitive and instinctive. Because you've practiced them before. So why would a monkey, there's one particular lot of monkeys or chimps or something that are particularly attached to sex. So they're born, and then the second they're born, they come out and they turn around and they have sex with their mummy, and their daddy, and their sister, and their brother, and their auntie, and their uncle, and their friends, and their enemies. They really like sex. Well, if you unpack that behaviour, what's the conceptual story behind it? Okay, they can't articulate it because they're programmed with it. But it's the story that, totally addicted to believing that thing is more delicious than it really is. That's all. And it's the source of my happiness. So you run to it like a magnet. And the trouble with attachment, because it triggers good feelings, that's one of its functions. It does trigger good feelings. No one denies that. But it also blinds us to seeing the harm. Because what it does is two things. It causes the object to look delicious, the fishing, when this little boy met fishing. It caused it to look beautiful, and it caused pleasant feelings. So then he was as blind as a bat. He never was able to see the suffering he was causing. That's the trouble with attachment. So when a person who is attached to jumping on little girls, addicted day and night, then of course they're going to lie like maniacs to themselves, believing this romantic nonsense bullshit story that pedophiles have. You have to believe it, You'd go mad if you didn't. You couldn't do it. So you've got to believe the ridiculous story. And that's what attachment's doing. It's writing this dramatic novel every second about everything we see. Everything is our karmic appearance, Mama Zoe says. Everything we're seeing is an interpretation of what's in our mind. Everything comes from the mind. So to know the mind is what is Buddha's expertise, But to the degree of subtlety we have no idea about in our culture with respect to us. Until eventually we unpack and unravel and deconstruct and get rid of the deepest assumption of all, which is the assumption of the inherent I. So maybe we have to talk about that before we go home. So all this stuff we're discussing here, which is like high school, about the way the mind works, is preparation for getting to the one called emptiness. It's not separate. Because all these delusions have the job of embellishing, of lying, they're embellishers, they're liars, they're deceptions, they're delusional. So it's massive, you know. So the deepest lie, the one that drives even the attachment in the first place, the one that causes us to be in samsara in the first place, whether it's in the God realms or the hell realms, the whole spectrum, that's the presence of this ego grasping, this root delusion, the biggest lie of all, the most pervasive, most subtle lie in the mind that informs all the other lies. So once that one is uprooted, all the other lies collapse. That's when, from that second, you climb out of samsara and you can't fall back. You've got more work to do to clean up the act, but you can't go back after that. That's when you become an Arya being, a superior being, they say. From then you start to get out of samsara. You're not out of samsara yet, but you can't fall back. So that's this miraculous turning point, this paradigm shift that we need to make, you know. And all this stuff we've talked about so far, including with compassion, leads us to this one. So let's look at this one, the deepest lie of all. It's called ignorance, a simple word. In Tibetan, ma-ripa, unawareness. But it's known colloquially, which is really tasty, as ego grasping. Ego grasping. So what it is this delusion, a lie, a deception, an embellishment. But what it embellishes, like if your attachment embellishes the deliciousness of the cup. Aversion embellishes the ugliness of the cup. Ignorance informs both of those. Ego grasping, maripa, informs both of those and embellishes the actual ontological status of a pretty cup or ugly cup itself. So it's much more primordial, and it's the root delusion, such that until that's uprooted, we will always be in samsara, never endingly, you know. So the first thing, the one framework for this is really important. One marvelous framework, Buddha's teachings, is the two truths. They talk about the two truths. It's a really good framework to understand this. So what Buddha's saying is the universe consists of trillions and trillions individual phenomena. There's phenomena, object, existent. There are several synonyms for that which exists. And this is a crucial term because Buddha says right now, because we're driven by delusions, we're living in la-la land and are not in touch with that which exists, because delusions make things up. So our job is, the wisdom wing is to get to see how things exist. It's not just some, you know, clever thing. It's primordially, utterly necessary. All of us, you know. It's not just for the philosophers. So, the trillions of things in the world. So what Buddha is saying is we first have to establish clearly the conventional reality of those things. What is this? You name it, you define it, you all agree upon it. Now we can begin to describe how it exists conventionally in order to get to see how ultimately it exists. So the two truths, conventional and ultimate. The shorthand for conventional is this term dependent arising. Interdependence. Dependence. This is a massively important word for Buddhism. A massively important word. So, basically what Buddha's saying is everything in the universe, whether it's a Buddha, a hell being, a peanut, you know, a moment of anger, an atom, we first name it, we define it, we agree upon the definition, we establish its conventional existence. And that's already a crucial job to do. So, what's a cup, mummy? Don't just believe what she tells you. She says, well, darling, what's that flat bottom container? So I learn the meaning of those words and I get to see it's a flat bottom container. But I'm not happy yet, because that's the first part of the definition. I need to know the second part, and again, this is a massively important point for Lama Tsongkhapa, for the Prasangika view about emptiness. We have to know what is its job, what is its function. Oh, sweetheart, it holds my tea, she'll tell me. So now I still don't believe her. We'll believe anything anyone tells us. We're suckers, you know. I should say to her, but kindly prove it, please. You can't just make something up. Prove it to me. So she'll get the tea, won't she? And she will go like this, and she'll pour it. And I'll see, in fact, it fits the definition. It holds her tea. So we've just proven. But it was not enough yet. We're going to make sure there are no other valid cognitions. This is massively important. A valid cognition is the job of your mind. Mind is the subject. It cognizes, or is aware, or knows. These three verbs are synonymous. It's the job of your mind. Your sensory consciousness knows certain phenomena. Eye consciousness can cognize shape and colour. Ear consciousness cognizes sound. Then we have mental consciousness, which is where the workshop is, which is all the dramas are. And nothing goes astray. It's all in there. So, its job is to cognize. Right now, Buddha says, these delusions, these liars, these embellishers are causing us to cognize phenomena that don't exist. So divine, delicious cup that's special and antique and worth $1,000 that belonged to my grandma, that's the embellishments I put onto this cup, isn't it? So I'm super attached to that cup. So the attachment makes it appear something so special to me. We know that. Well, Buddha's saying in its nature, in its bones, that isn't what exists there. That cake, that square brown triangle, we don't just see that. We don't see chocolate cake in its nature. We see a divine, delicious chocolate cake that will definitely make me happy. So we don't realise that we're embellishing all the time. We don't realise these delusions are embellishing all the time. So we see what we're embellishing. We don't see the truth. And the deepest embellisher is this ego grasping. So we've got to make sure there are no other valid cognitions in the minds of ordinary people about what this is. And once we've established that indeed everybody agrees it is a cup, then we've settled it. We sign the contract, we tick the box, we shake hands, we now can begin to describe and discuss how actually a cup exists. We've got to first establish it as a phenomenon, as an object of knowledge. So now we can begin to look into how it does exist conventionally, in order to prove how it exists ultimately. So the shorthand for conventional is dependent arising. The shorthand for the ultimate, or the final, or the actual, is emptiness. So clearly, we have to unpack these words. I mean, if you hear about, relativity, yeah, I've heard about that. What's it mean? I don't know. It's shorthand, isn't it, for years and years of massive, fascinating information. So this word's a very shorthand, emptiness, yeah. But we hear it in the most bizarre ways. We've got to really unpack this word. But as Lama Yeshe puts it, dependent arising is the king of logics, as he puts it, to prove emptiness. So, how do we look at this? Well, the Buddha's view is, there are many ways in which things exist interdependently. Things exist in dependence upon various factors. So he has three main levels, each of which is an argument with one of the philosophical positions, either of some of the other Buddhist schools, because this is taken from the point of view of what's known as the Prasangika Madhyamika view, which is the view that our lamas teach at. There are various philosophical positions in Buddhism, and indeed even the very first one is the argument with the philosophical position of the Hindus, and they had many views as well, and don't underestimate them, they're pretty amazing beings. They're the ones, as the Dalai Lama says, more than 3,000 years ago, who began this extraordinary investigation into the nature of self. They're these genius thinkers. There's nothing like this in the West, with respect, I would suggest. So, the very first level at which things exist interdependently, the very first level at which things exist in dependence upon, is independence upon causes. Well, hardly a no-brainer. But I remember when I studied this with my philosophical teacher, Geshe Tetsog, when I first studied, he used the example of the phenomenon called Robina, which of course is why I remember it. You understand? And he said, it can be said that everything in the universe up to the first moment of Robina can be established validly as a cause and a condition for the existence of Robina. Now, I thought it was pretty cosmic at the time. You understand? But it's logical. It's true. You can see it. So let's just look at that even briefly. So this cup, he made it. Made exclusively for heritage, okay. Stoke-on-Trent. Oh, it's a nice. So Mrs. Heritage, okay, pretend. Mrs. Heritage. So we know perfectly well, don't we, that this cup didn't fall out of a tree like this. We know that. We know it came out of a person's mind. It's obvious if you think about it. So Mrs. Heritage first conceived of this cup. We know that, pretend. Now she has to convey that visualisation to the factory or wherever, isn't it? So right there, even before you go further, let's say Mrs. Heritage. Well, she had a mummy, didn't she? And there couldn't be Mrs. Heritage if she didn't have a mummy. And there couldn't be that mummy if there weren't a previous mummy. And there couldn't be that mummy, and you keep going back like, you know, the reverse sort of dominoes. You've got to go back to the first mummy in the universe. You've got to keep going back because each one depends upon the other. You can't, in other words, the point about dependent arising is you can't isolate something. You can't isolate something that didn't have a cause. So in relation to the cup, it's very obvious. You get back to the first second of the universe, you know. It's not meant to be just clever. So it's pointing out that everything that exists depends upon causes. So this is a really brilliant analysis to do in relation to the phenomenon called I. So okay, the universe has countless phenomena. We are a phenomenon. We're an object. We're an existent. We're an established base. There are several synonyms for that which exists. So we are an example of a phenomenon called a person or a self or an I. These words are synonymous in the conventional sense. We're an I, we're a person, we're a self. A Buddha is a person, a hell being is a person, an animal is a person, an I, a self. So let's take this particular self, conventionally. Okay, this is where it's so powerful to think about the law of cause and effect when it comes to I. Well, that's called the law of karma. Now, if we look at how we suffer in daily life, cut with the instinctive view of ego that we're innocent victim, reinforced by the materialist view that indeed we are an innocent victim because we didn't ask to get born. We know our parents didn't consult us and say, may we create you, Robina. We know they didn't. They made me, didn't they? So they didn't. I mean, do you understand my point? That's the view we have. So that fits with our instinct of self-pity, the instinct of it's not fair, I didn't ask to get born. We've already got that view from ego grasping, and that's what creates the materialist view of your mother and father make you. Where do you think that view came from? With people like minds like you and me. We made it. We created it, you know. So, if we look at how we suffer in daily life, kind of in the primordial sense, it's this poor self-pity me, as Lama Yeshe puts it. It's not fair. How did that happen to me? I don't deserve it. It is not fair. I deserve happiness. I don't deserve suffering. This is how we all naturally feel. This is attachment and aversion. Join the universe, people. And it's reinforced by that philosophical view. Well, the most powerful way to counteract this poor self-pity me, ego, the way we cling to the I, is to start thinking about how, in fact, I did ask to get born. In fact, I created me. In a conventional sense, I'm the fruit of my past actions. I'm the fruit of what I did. I'm the fruit of my own delusions and my own virtues. So that demands that we start to take responsibility, which cuts the self-pity me. So it's a very powerful, already a very powerful way to think about karma, to cut ego grasping, to cut the self-pity me. Can you hear that? Very powerful. So now let's get to the next one. This is really tasty. And this is not the subtlest one yet, but it's already extremely tasty. The second level at which things exist, Buddha says, is they exist in dependence upon their parts. They exist in dependence upon bits and pieces. So this is an argument to one of the positions that says there is, and this is how we think. And this is one of the positions that Buddha's arguing with, and it's in our bones, deep in our being. He's saying, because of this ego grasping, because of this ignorance, we believe 1,000,000,000% that there is among these parts, and we have to establish the parameters of this I. Here are the parameters, isn't it? Doesn't include that, right? It's here, isn't it? The parameters of this conventional phenomenon called Robina is like this. And if we take the Buddha's view, we're made of body and we're made of mind. Mind is made of many thoughts. So the parts of mind are thoughts. The parts of the body are the bones, the atoms, and etc. So if you started listing all the parts, you've got millions of parts, right? We have, haven't we? So that's the components of a person, Buddha says. But we think there's another component. We think there's another component that is like another part that is like running the other parts, is the boss part. that runs the show is like the landlord, the puppeteer, another part. And that part that runs the mind and the body is called I. We believe this 1 billion%. So in other words, we believe there is a part in here, and this is the point, that is independent of, separate from the body, separate from the mind, that's independent of the body and mind. So that's how we even talk in our world. There's body and mind and spirit. This is the position of the Christian. This is the position of the Hindu. That there is a part that's not the body and is not the mind, but is like the boss part. We instinctively believe that. 1 billion%. And Buddha says, don't be ridiculous. First of all, there can't be such a thing, and secondly, you don't bloody need one. Which is kind of shocking. So let's analyse it. And of course, they study this for 40 years and then go meditate for another 40, if not 40 more lifetimes, to get this point. So, don't hold your breath. But this is the crucial one. Now look at our language. This is already showing, we have to analyse. Look at the language. I have a nose. I get angry. Everything, the central player in our head is the thought I, isn't it? So with normal thoughts, you'd hope, if you're speaking the truth, thoughts should be an expression of what exists, don't you think? Would you agree with that? Okay, good. So let's do an analysis. Let's do an analysis. So I'd say to you, I have a table. Let's call this a table, a clock, and a whatever this is. What's this called? Who?
Microphone.
Is it? Okay.
Transmitter.
What?
Microphone transmitter.
A transmitter. I have a table, a clock, and a transmitter. Okay. Now, if we say words, it's useful that those words refer to something. Wouldn't you agree? Just conventionally speaking, if I say I have $4, I better point out $4, hadn't I? Otherwise, I'm lying. So we say all these words. So I have a table, a clock, and a transmitter. So how many phenomena have I mentioned?
4.
Say the phenomena. Speak them out. Good. Now, in conventional terms, if that's a true statement, you would like me to prove it, wouldn't you? It would be reasonable if we're going to communicate. Now, this means, isn't it, that those 4 phenomena, if we can point out 4 separate phenomena, they have to be separate from each other, don't they? It's reasonable, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Okay, so then there's a table, right? So I can remove the table, but the clock will still work very nicely, won't it? So one of the meanings of dependence here is that if something is independent, this is meaning they're separate. You hear that, don't you? It's pretty simple, isn't it? You can point them out. There's 2 things there. So I can remove my table. My clock is fine, isn't it? Would you agree?
Yeah.
And the transmitter works very nicely. And if I walk out the door, they're fine as well, aren't they? So we can point out 4 separate phenomena that don't depend on each other. Do you understand? In a very real sense. Okay, good. That's pretty simple. Well, I can also tell you that I have a nose, a hand, and a foot, can't I? So it's going to be the same thing. Conventionally. Ordinary, uncomplicated language. Conventionally. Uncomplicated, nothing special, no drama here, no tricks. If that were true, we have to point out 4 separate phenomena, that each of which doesn't depend on the other. So here's my foot, right? Now my foot, it can be broken, but my hand is working fine, isn't it? Do you agree? Mm-hmm. My nose can be blocked, but my hand works fine, my foot works fine. Can you agree with that? Mm-hmm. Can you agree with that? Yes. So far there's 3 phenomena, each of which is independent of the other. Would you agree? Mm-hmm. So now we have to point out the 4th phenomenon, which is called I, which is separate from the hand, and separate from the foot, and separate from the nose, that can be removed and can walk out the door and leave the nose, the hand, and the foot here. Now this is most annoying, isn't it? Because we believe there is, but as soon as you try to prove it, it's infuriating, because you think it's a joke. Because this is really simple. Buddha says we actually believe there is one. And all our language expresses it. Our language expresses it. I did not do that. You know? You did that to me. When you nearly fall off the mountain, I nearly fell off the mountain. Well, Buddha says, don't be silly. Your body did. Lama Zopa says, if there is a separate I, and to even hear those words is annoying, Because we don't think we think there's a separate I. We don't think we think that. It's in fact, when we hear it, we think it's silly. Lama Zopa says, if there is a separate I, then the I could go to work and then the body and the mind can stay at home and relax. They would indeed be independent. So the point is, Buddha is in fact saying there is an I, but this is the tricky part, it's not separate. It is interdependent existing. It's a dependent arising. There is an I that does exist in dependence upon body and mind, but you can't separate them. You can't point them out, which is infuriating. So we have to analyse and search for that I that we are so convinced does exist, that does feel this and is doing that and has this and says this and lies and speaks the truth and wants happiness and goes here and goes there and, you know, all the rest. And Buddha says the belief in this I is why we suffer in the first place. And once we've cut that one, there is no fear. We are liberated. So let's do another exercise taken from another angle to show how we don't need a boss. I like this one. So this is called, would you agree this action is called I'm holding a cup in my right hand? Would you agree with that? That's a statement of truth, isn't it? Conventionally speaking. Yeah? You agree? Everybody? Yeah. Well, let's pretend I've forgotten how to do it. You'd have to educate me, right? Wouldn't you? And it'd be quite a lot of educating. You have a very long list of bits and pieces that I have to, first of all, recognise. I've got the thumb here and the index finger there and the pinky there and the this there and the wrist and the ligaments and the veins. There'd be an awful lot of pieces you'd have to write down. All the parts of the body, the components of the body that will play the role of holding a cup. There's an awful lot of parts, aren't there? You'd have to be very precise if I've forgotten, wouldn't you? Each thing, you'd have to write it all down, a very long list. Would you agree? So that's the parts of your body, right? Pretty reasonable, isn't it? Now the other parts, clearly the main ones, are the parts of the mind, aren't they? Because if this is a dead body, you'd have problems, wouldn't you? So this body needs to be imbued with a consciousness, wouldn't you agree? So now we have to look at all the parts of the mind that are going to be involved in the action of holding a cup. Are you with me? They've got to work with the body, don't they? The parts of the mind. So the very first one, the crucial one, like we've been talking, is the thought, is intention. I will hold the cup. It's a word. It's a that's the name for a thought, okay? That's a name for a thought, and the thought is intention. You with me? Mm-hmm. And if there's not intention, nothing's going to happen, is it? Do you understand? Then you've got to have attention. You've got to now pay attention. Then you've got to have concentration. You've got to have good memory, which is called mindfulness, not forgetting what you do, otherwise the cup will get dropped. You have to have alertness. There's many little parts of your mind, these neutral parts, like this mechanics of your mind. There's not much virtue involved in this or non-virtue. This is like a mechanical job, right? You with me, people? This is mainly, you've got to have some determination because you want to succeed, but there's not much virtue involved and there's not much delusions involved. It's just pretty much mechanical. You with me, people? Yeah. So there's many parts of your mind, would you agree? Intention, attention, this one, that one. And there's many parts of your body, would you agree? Yeah. So we've got a long list of those things. You agree? So have you noticed that I haven't yet mentioned the role for a part called I? Have you noticed that? Mm-hmm. We've discussed the parts of the mind and we've discussed the parts of the body. Now Buddha says that's all you need. They're working very nicely together, thank you. And that's why the Buddha would say there's no creator. The Muslims, and this is wonderful, they always say it, the first thing they say, the world is so amazing, there has to be an architect. That's the Christian view, the world is so special, there has to be a creator. That's the view, isn't it? Well, it's the same as the I. There's got to be a boss, an overarching boss who runs the show, a boss who intends, a boss who pays attention, an I who holds, an I who says, an I who gets angry. That's just words, but they're deceptive. Buddha says you won't find one. There doesn't need to be one. The body and the mind work nicely together, thank you. It's a bit of a shock, isn't it? You got any suggestions of what role this I would have that the mind and the body aren't doing? Say anything you like, bring it up, it's a good conversation, you know.
Observing.
But what role would it have in picking up the cup? What role would it play precisely?
It wouldn't have any role.
Well, then then it's not answering the question. I'm wanting to find a role for an I that the others aren't doing that's necessary to make the action happen.
Intention, is it?
Intention is part of the mind.
It's critiquing it, isn't it?
What?
It's critiquing the action.
What is?
The
No, that's
I.
called discrimination.
But isn't it
there's
critiquing
many-
how
No,
the cup's being
there's no
raised?
I. No,
But isn't that the role of the I, to critique the role, how the
no.
cup's being
What
raised?
critiques what's going on? There's many other parts of the mind. There's a part called discrimination. There's a part called there's many other parts of the mind, especially discrimination, that can see can make the decision between this and that and put all the pieces together. There's no other part that is having to do that. Intention itself intends. Attention pays attention. Discrimination makes the difference between this and that. All the other pieces of the mind do that job. They do that job. The mind does that job. We can hear it, can't we? We assume there's an I who runs it. And when we say those words, our words say that. You see, that's why our words lie, and we believe we fall into the trap. I did that, we think. When we're watching our breath, watching our mind, we get very tricky. Oh, I'm watching my mind, we'll say. Well, be more precise, please. Which part of your I? Your part of your mind is watching another part of your mind. It's just the label we use is I am doing it. But we fall into the trap of believing there's an object out there that has some real ontological status that bears the label I, because our words are deceptive. This dualistic language, we've created this based upon the belief that there is a little I in there that is running the show, that does good and does bad, you know. This is not the subtlest meaning of emptiness yet. Now, another chapter. Close the book, go to the next chapter. Now let's look at the word emptiness, because this really throws us. Okay? Okay. First of all, we use it in a very easy way. We will say, won't we, oh, my cup's empty. Oh, gosh, my cup's empty. Won't we say that? What do we mean?
There's nothing in there.
No, what more precisely do we mean?
Nothing left.
No, what do we mean more precisely? What goes in a cup? Tea. Tea. So I'm expecting tea, and I get a surprise. Oh, my cup's empty. What we're saying is, oh no, there's no tea there, isn't it? We're saying there's no tea there, but we say it's empty, which means there's no tea there, isn't it? If you look at your bank account, oh God, my bank account's empty, you'll say. I mean, oh, bloody no dollars in there. We'd say that, wouldn't we? Yeah. So, it's not complicated. We say, oh, we look in the room, no, there's no one, the room's empty. We'll say that, won't we? It's very casual. So the word empty is nothing more or less difficult than that. It's referring to something that doesn't exist. That's all. There's something that you think should be there, isn't there. That's all it means. Simple meaning. Don't get complicated. Please, don't get complicated. So, one piece of information. The next piece of information, this is really important. Like I said, the mind, which is what cognizes, which is what awares, which is what knows, which cognizes, and which can develop the wisdom to cognize that which exists without mistake, that's enlightenment. It is called, they often refer to it as the subject, and it always cognizes something. Mind is subject, and it cognizes an object. Object doesn't mean something physical. An object of consciousness or object of knowledge is simply something that the mind cognizes. Can you hear that word? So whatever is being cognized is called an object. Can you hear that?
Yes.
Okay, good. So do you agree that that colour is red? Just conventionally speaking, we agree that that's red, don't we?
Yep.
So do you agree red exists?
Yes.
Do you agree red is an object of the mind? I consciousness can cognize red, can't it? So I consciousness is subject and red is the object of the I consciousness. Do you agree? So Buddha says every state of mind, even to the subtlest, always has an object. Okay? Always something it cognizes. Do you accept that? Good. Let's say, what's your name, Jess? Let's say Jess is colourblind. Possible, right? And he sees blue every time he sees red. Let's just say, Now we can agree that conventionally this is not blue, don't we agree? So we can agree that his I consciousness is cognizing something that doesn't exist. Would you agree? Here? Blue doesn't exist here, does it? Can you accept this?
Yes.
So he's cognizing something that doesn't exist, isn't he? You agree?
Yes.
Okay, all delusions are doing that. They're cognizing delicious chocolate cake. It's not what we think it is. We're cognizing an I that isn't there. We're cognizing monstrous, horrible Freds the cause of all my suffering. That's not the Fred that's there. So all the time, the delusions are cognizing things that don't exist. So he's got I's problem. So he's always seeing blue. Now we could bully him into believing it's red, but it's a big drag for him, you know. He's got to keep remembering, oh, it's not blue, and try to pretend he knows it's red, isn't it? So we can fix his eyes, can't we? We know that. Let's say we could fix his eyes. So we now present the red thermos to him again. So what will he now cognise?
It's red.
It's easy enough, it's reasonable to think he'd cognise red, isn't it? But let's look at the history, the background. He's always seen it as blue, hasn't he? That means he's built up in his memory the concept that it's blue. He's got it stored in his mind. He's got the habit of seeing blue. Would you agree with that? Would you agree with that? It's a very strong habit in his mind, isn't it? And he's expecting blue, isn't he? He's expecting blue. Would you agree? So when he sees this, he's going to get the shock of his life. Oh my God, it's not blue, he'll say. Won't he say that? Wouldn't he say that? Do you agree with the point? Because he's expecting blue, isn't he? He's expecting blue. So he gets a shock when he sees it, and he'll say, oh my God, it's not blue. Would you agree? So if I'm expecting tea in my cup, I'll go, oh my God, there's no tea in my cup. I would say that, wouldn't I? If I'm expecting my boyfriend Fred to be there when I come home and he's left me, I'll get the shock of my life, won't I? Oh my God, there's no Fred. Do you agree? Do you agree with this? So let's turn there's no Fred, there's no tea, there's no blue into an object. It's called the absence of blue, the absence of Fred, the absence of tea. Can you hear that? It's not meant to be clever. Or even better, the emptiness of tea. Emptiness just means absence. Don't think it's more special. It's just another word. The absence of tea. The absence of blue. The absence of Fred. Now, do you agree red does exist on this thermos? And red is the object of your eye consciousness. Do you agree blue doesn't exist on this thermos? Do you agree with that? So when Jess sees the truth for the first time, because his eyes are now fixed, what he will actually see, what he's cognizing, is the emptiness of blue, the absence of blue. Turn what he's cognizing into a phenomenon. Red is a phenomenon. Absence of blue is a phenomenon. It's not a phenomenon of the eye consciousness. You can, because you know it, you conceptualize it. It's a conceptual object, isn't it? You've got to think of, a dog wouldn't see the absence of blue. Do you understand what I'm saying here? And the mind has to cognize something. So what he just cognized there was the absence of something that has never existed there, that he's always thought existed. But because he's fixed his mind, he now sees the truth. He sees the absence of blue. Well, that's what's going to happen when you have your first moment of understanding dependent arising. By thinking about dependent arising, what it will trigger for the first time is the recognition that the independent I that we've always believed is there has never been there and isn't there. So you'll get the shock of your life. You go, oh my God, there's no I. For the first time, when you have your first direct insight into that, that's called you cognizing the absence of the I. Can you hear that? So emptiness is referring to the absence of something. And it's the absence of something you thought was there. It's not just being clever. Like we could say there's no elephant in this room, couldn't we? So we could argue that we're all cognizing the absence of an elephant. But who cares, because no one's expecting an elephant. The crucial point here is it's when you're expecting something to be there because you've clung to it all your and Buddha says we've clung to it for eons. So the shock, the profound shock, when you first have the direct first cognition of the absence of that I that you always believed was there. Lama Zopa says the first response of the great yogis is incredible fear. The best response is joy, because they finally see the truth. So emptiness is referring to the absence, in particular, of the I that you think was there. So this second one we've just talked about, the I that's independent of the parts. It's not the subtlest emptiness yet. There's even a more subtle level, but never mind. So it's getting our head around the use of the term emptiness. It's nothing cosmic. Can you hear the point? So, I find a really good example is your money in your bank. Let's say you've saved up $5,000 and you know there's $5,000 there and you can't wait to get it out to spend it. Well, will you not get a shock when you open your bank account and you see a zero written there? Believe me, you won't see zero. What will you see?
Absence
of $5,000. Oh my God, where's my $5,000, you'll say, won't you? Isn't that a very vivid experience? So that vivid experience of seeing the absence of what you thought was there, that's not the same as going, oh, there's no dollars in the bank, because that's how we tend to think of emptiness. Oh, there's no I. Oh, there's nothing in the universe. It doesn't matter anyway. That's nihilism. The difference between seeing there's no dollars in your bank and seeing the absence of $5,000 is a very rich difference, isn't it? Can you hear that?
Yeah.
So we tend to think emptiness means, oh, there's no I. It doesn't matter anyway. That's the nihilistic view, and it's totally, utterly in the wrong direction. It's the absence of something you've clung to for eons that you've totally believed has been there, but that even more dramatic than, because $5,000 could have been there, blue could be there, tea could be there, people could be in the room, but this one could never exist. It's a complete fabrication. And that's the first second when you have your direct non-conceptual insight into that absence is the first second of you getting out of samsara, you know, and you can't fall back after that. So it's a pretty tasty one. And the logical thinking we have to do that triggers that insight is dependent arising, the king of logics. There's many logical reasons we need to learn, but this is the king of logics, they say. And we haven't got to the subtlest one yet. So when we go about, oh, I've got to meditate on emptiness, we haven't got a clue what they're talking about. Emptiness, we space out, you know. We've got to think about dependent arising. You think about dependent arising. That's what triggers. Aha, that means there is no I independent of the parts. But you've got to think it through. And that triggers the insight into the absence of the I independent of the parts, which doesn't exist. So we have the one of seeing the absence of something. It's very massive. Like, you know, if Jesse's my boyfriend, he leaves me. All I'll notice every day is the absence of Jesse in my house, won't I? If you're walking to the house, you're not going to notice the absence of Jesse if you didn't know I had a boyfriend. So it's all, you know, absence of something is very vivid. It's the absence of something you want. If you're craving for a boyfriend, you know, this is how we suffer. This is why we suffer with delusions. You're so attached to the idea of having a boyfriend, you're always noticing there's no boyfriend, aren't you? Are you seeing what I'm saying? Yes. Now, I don't have a boyfriend. Not only do I not care, but I'm happy I don't have a boyfriend. I mean, it's sort of like I'm so delighted to find the absence of a boyfriend in my house when I go home. Oh, wow, amazing. You understand what I'm saying? I'm just joking, but I'm talking. You understand? So that's how we make everything up. And we cause our own suffering. You know, it's like if you keep wanting $1 million and you never have it, you're going to be tortured. If you keep wanting a baby but you can't get one, of course you're going to suffer. It sounds cruel to say it like that. Because the attachment is so deep. We brought it with us from past lives. That's why people have such an empty feeling, this neediness of never having enough. This is what attachment is. Imagining I don't have something. Buddha says it's a complete insanity joke. You have everything in here. This is not quite emptiness, but it's leading to it. We make things up. It's hard to get past it, of course it is. But to acknowledge that the feeling is so real. That's why it's hard to see it's conceptually based, you know, because it feels so real. We never think that loneliness is coming from a conceptual story. We never think that. Yes?
Is the fascination with use of terminology I particular to Western cultures, or is, for example...
No, darling, it's beginningless time. No, Buddha says it's beginningless time. Yeah. It's the nature of delusions. It's beginningless time. It's beginningless time we've had this concept of I. All animals have it, but they don't even say it. It's so instinctive that they don't say it. Their behaviour indicates they believe in an inherent I, but it's primordially deep. This is beginningless, Buddha says. These illusions are beginningless. You could say that with modern culture, with lots of things as a result of lots of virtue, but we've got masses of attachment to it, there's an extra strong neurotic sense of an I. Of course there is, but this is the nature of samsara, which is beginningless, Buddha says. Which is the sense of a separate I. Finally, this is where it sounds really cosmic. Buddha's saying, when we realise emptiness, the absence of that fantasy I that has never existed, and you add compassion to the mix, you've got the two wings of the bird, then it's like you now are a Buddha mind, and your consciousness, literally because it's beyond all delusions, your consciousness, remember, is not physical. So if you think about it, how can it be confined? By space or time or matter? It can't, logically. Right now, our mind is stuck in this body. We can't see past our own nose. We don't remember most of today. Forget about yesterday. Forget about a past life. What a joke. Because our minds are thick as posts, you know, because of delusions and grasping and attachment. So we are profoundly limited in understanding the function of our consciousness. So when we've removed all the delusions, your consciousness literally is now completely released to the point where it can only be wherever there is existence. There can't not be. You can only know that which exists. There is nothing else. That means you cognize the minds of all beings. How can you not? Because they exist. You'll have infinite compassion for every one, as if, because now with having realised emptiness to the subtlest degree and adding compassion to the mix, you've removed all delusions from the mind. So your consciousness is as big as the universe. It pervades wherever there is existence. It sees everything as it is. It has infinite empathy for every being as if they were you. There's literally no longer a sense of subject-object, literally no longer a sense of a separate I. I mean, as cosmic as that sounds, Buddha says, that's what a Buddha is. And Buddha says that's our potential. That's what we can all become. So the very idea of being a separate little self walking around the universe is the symptom in the first place of all the problems in the first place. We've created that with this ego grasping, Buddha says. So way to go, one step at a time. The subtlest level of emptiness is that there is not one atom of anything, in anything, there's not one atom of meaning in anything that doesn't come from the mind. There's nothing in and of itself. There's nothing independent of the mind calling it that. But, as Lama Zopa says, once we've realised that level of emptiness, he says, it's as if there is no I. But there is. But what does exist is so subtle, it is as if it is an illusion. It is as if it does not exist. But it does. But the tricky part is putting these two seeming contradictions together. And it sounds like just clever yogi talk, but it's literally true. So Lama Tsongkhapa says in one of his wonderful Lam Rim texts, Songs of Experience, Hymns of Experience, which he calls it. How's it go? When we realise emptiness in our meditation, we're absorbed in emptiness, which means they're beyond appearances. We're just absorbed in the absence of everything, right? Never mind that. But in a daily life, our job is to, even though we're seeing all the different phenomena all jumping around in front of us, we learn to see them as as if they were an illusion, because they do not exist from their own side. But, he says, nevertheless, they do function exactly as we have established. So even though there's nothing from the side of the cup, not one atom of anything that makes it a cup, that hasn't come from the mind. It's merely labelled. But and so instinctively we hear that, we kind of go, there must be no cup. And we chuck the baby out with the bathwater, we become nihilistic. That's a mistake. It's incredibly nuanced, the meaning. So on the one side we can say, cup lacks even an atom of inherent existence, of independent existence, independent specifically of the mind labelling it cup. But, nevertheless, it functions exactly as stated. So these two seem, right now, we have in the mind, Buddha says, due to this ego grasping, we have the instinctive view that as soon as we hear there's nothing on the side of the cup, as I said, we instantly go to the wrong extreme view of nihilism. We chuck the baby up with the bathwater. Well, there's no cup. There's no I, it doesn't matter anyway. That's the nihilistic view. That's outrageous. And then as soon as we hear that there is a cup that does exist, independence upon causes, parts, and the mind calling it that, we can't help but then reify it, concretize it, and go, thank God there's something after all, grasp, you know. So this is the other extreme view, and this is natural within us. So all the philosophical positions, the creative philosophical positions of this one, there's something reified up there, concrete, definitely can point to. And these amazing Indians, don't insult them. They're the ones who began this incredible investigation into exactly what the self is. They're the ones who delved deep into their minds, who created this technique. They're phenomenal, amazing, genius thinkers. And then Buddha came out of that extraordinary tradition, and then he diverged in his own direction in relation particularly to the exact understanding of what is the I. And this is the subtlest meaning that on the one side there's not one atom of anything from the side of the eye or the cup or anything else, but nevertheless it does function, and it's seeming contradiction, but just putting these two together, that's the middle way. That's the actual middle way. And that's what we have to get to. That's why Tsongkhapa says, I think he quotes Nagarjuna, that the powerful way to put these seeming contradictions together, which is utterly necessary not to become nihilistic or eternalistic, is every time we hear emptiness, we take ourselves from the abyss of nihilism, which is instinctive, and go, ha-ha, Robina, there being no I from its own side means there is a dependent arising I. And every time you're clinging to the reified I, there must be an I. No, Robina, that means there's no I from its own side. So these two keep you really tight, and they bring us to the middle way. Right now we've got the two extremes, like Harry Potter, between the platform 9 3/4 or whatever it was, you know. You just can't find it. That's the middle way, you know. So you've got to emptiness. In other words, when we really are on the right track, we understand that emptiness means dependent arising, and dependent arising means emptiness. We've got to think this way against our instinct, you know. Then we'll never be a problem. We'll be on the right track, and slowly that starts to become tasty. We put meat on the bones of it. It becomes real for our mind, you know. So important. Then you can't be nihilistic. You can't be extreme, you know. And you can see in our daily lives our way of just being up and down like yo-yos. I mean, I'm not joking when I say we're all bipolar, and I'm really serious. We are all bipolar. It's just a question of degree. So attachment is the up mode, when you go on berserk and you finally found happiness, you found everything, and then the bubble bursts, you go crashing down where? To despair, isn't it? That's the nihilism. You want to kill yourself now because there's nothing that's important. That's the nihilism of despair. And the other one is the divine, now I've found happiness, now I've got it, now it's perfect, now it's fantastic, wow, 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 cling, cling, cling. And we go up and down between these like yo-yos. Do we not? That's attachment and aversion. So we get steady mind, you know, and become courageous. Nothing upsets us then eventually as we develop, you know. Are we communicating? Yeah. Any questions before we go home? 3:30. This has to, and the more we hear all this stuff, all of this is the basis of getting valid compassion. Without this stuff, compassion's piss weak. Excuse me. Are we communicating here? Yeah. This is what gives strength and power and iron and courage and unbelievable courage to compassion. Compassion is easy after this, and compassion is outrageous. We haven't even begun to talk about compassion yet, I'm sorry. 3:36, we didn't get to compassion yet. Maybe we should quickly go through compassion. We'll talk a little bit, just mention a few bits about compassion. Okay. Well, as we know, you know, all these techniques that have been developed over the centuries, little packages of techniques that all the holy beings in Tibet and coming from Shantideva and all the rest in India have cultivated, that give us the techniques to use so we can that culminate in bodhicitta. So what's bodhicitta? Bodhicitta, awakening thought. It's referring to this outrageous attitude. It's not technically the same as compassion. It's on the basis of compassion. It's driven by compassion. It's the culmination of compassion. And bodhicitta's got two parts. One part is this paradigm shift on the basis of getting, on the basis of equanimity, seeing the kindness of the mother, all these little 11 techniques that we learn from the Lam Rim, starting with equanimity, that culminate in compassion and great compassion, that then kick into and become bodhicitta. And Tonglen is one of the key techniques that helps us get that. It's the more radical method of accomplishing bodhicitta. So the first part of bodhicitta is, and once you've got it, there's this remarkable, again, this paradigm shift that's occurred. No longer is there the thought of I, the normal I. No longer. It doesn't arise. I mean, you know your I, you're not stupid. Or who are you? I'm Robina. You won't get confused, But the normal way that I runs the show, the self-pity I, the poor I, the fat I, the thin I, the mean I, the nobody loves me I, that fantasy nonsense, none of those thoughts. There's no concept of that anymore. That's impossible to conceptualize in our culture. You'd be called deeply mentally ill if you didn't have that in our culture, because we make that the central player we reinforce that I in our culture, our science, our psychology. It's fascinating. There's no longer the thought of that one. Meaning there is only the thought of others. Not just occasionally. Totally, naturally, that's now occurred, this paradigm shift. The second part of bodhicitta, that means you help whoever's in front of you. It's your job. Bodhisattvas, it's their job description. The second part of bodhicitta, and this is the very first moment of getting it, you've got many stages to go from there, is that you never stop, no matter how many countless lives it takes. It doesn't matter. You're never going to give up. Working with sentient beings, being born again and again and again in as many many lives as possible to become a Buddha. Your long-term goal is the perfection of Buddhahood. So you'll never give up doing that. Very first level of the bodhicitta, when you sort of achieved, I think Arya bodhicitta, when you realise emptiness. Well, there are then 10 stages of bodhicitta you've got to get through. 10 stages of levels of bodhisattva. And the first level of bodhisattva already can manifest their mind in 100 forms simultaneously throughout universes to benefit sentient beings, and you keep increasing that power until eventually you become a Buddha, when you can manifest in infinite forms simultaneously throughout space. And this is what your job is when you finally become a Buddha. So in the wisdom wing, the whole emphasis is on the main cause of suffering is attachment. They frame it in another way in the compassion wing. They say the main obstacle is, they call it, and you know this term, self-cherishing. Well, it's quite a nice phrase. A friend of mine in America heard about Buddhism, and she went to this course on self-cherishing. She thought, what a lovely idea. I'd love to cherish myself. She got a big surprise when she discovered it means selfishness, you know. So really attachment, like self-cherishing is simply the consequence of having ego grasping, which is the root delusion, and therefore having attachment to get what that I wants. Because self-cherishing or selfishness is simply the attitude of putting self first. So that's used in the development of compassion, because what we're aiming to do is make that shift of putting others first. That's the goal in the bodhisattva wing, you know. So the very first practice, you know how there's all these little techniques. There's two main methods that they teach in the Lamrim for cultivating bodhicitta on the basis of the wisdom wing, which is, one is called the 6 causes and 1 effect, and one is called exchanging self for others. Well, you know, Pabongka Rinpoche says the exchanging self for others is like the more radical one. And they're all our holy beings in Tibet, His Holiness Lama Zopa, all our lamas. This is the method that they mainly practice. It's a more dramatic, more radical, more outrageous, more brave approach, which is the one of smashing self-cherishing and making this shift, as I said, this paradigm shift, and putting self ahead of others. So, okay. So one point to make, you know, if you're on the Hinayana path, which is junior school and high school, and you're going to graduate at high school, which means you're going to realise emptiness, and eventually in one life you'll get that emptiness, you'll perfect that realisation. After many lives, in one particular life you'll perfect that realisation, you'll cut all the obstacles to liberation, and at the end of that life you'll zap into bliss, because you're done, you're finished, you're cooked, you know, you won't come back. So let's analyse how you'd be. First of all, how you'd be. You'd be an unbelievable person. You'd be blissful, you'd be radiant, you'd be wise, you'd be stable, you'd be courageous, you'd be joyful, you'd be no attachment, no anger, no jealousy at the grossest of the levels, you know. And you'd also have enormous love and compassion, because why wouldn't you? Because that's what's left. When you've gotten rid of attachment and the rest, you don't just become this kind of nothing person. Every time you lessen attachment and anger, you grow love and compassion. It's just natural. So you have astonishing love and compassion. But the point is this. For life after life after life after life, your motivation, your goal has been high school. Your goal is your graduation at high school, nirvana, your liberation. That's your goal. So you head towards that. That's your motivation. That's where you're going to head. So then the other one is, in that life, when you're ready to finish, you're done, you're going to have masses of compassion, of love. Of course you will, there's no question. But the point is this. When it comes to your death time, because you're programmed by this motivation to get the hell out of samsara as quick as possible, your bliss, which you're experiencing, which is so astonishing, and your motivation override your compassion, and you won't come back. Now, if you're heading towards graduating at university, which is becoming a bodhisattva, which is becoming a Buddha, your goal is going further. So you might even get to the point where you don't need to come back, but because your motivation is great compassion, is bodhicitta. I must benefit others. So you have kicked into this extra level of compassion, like I mentioned before. Compassion is may you not suffer, but great compassion is this extra level that is the unique one of the bodhisattva. It's like the personal responsibility of the bodhisattva. It's like the bodhisattva saying, it's my job. As Lama Zopa puts it, or the prayers say, if I don't do it, who will? It's this intense, courageous attitude that it's your job, and if I don't do it, who will indeed? So great compassion is this extra level. So when you die, even though you don't need to come back, your great compassion and your bodhicitta, not to mention, override your bliss, and you happily keep taking rebirth. So the great compassion is the key factor, and that's the one that leads to bodhicitta, you know. The great compassion is, what can I do? What can I do to take the suffering away? That's the key point. So I think the main thing I want to talk about, not much time really, is how we make this realistic for our lives. Because if you analyse the qualities of bodhisattvas, if I just think about, you know, maybe some of you don't know Lama Zopa, he happens to be my teacher, he's the boss of this centre, whatever, but I mean, when you see him up close and personal, when you hear about him, it's kind of very tiring, it's exhausting, it's kind of depressing. You know, as Roger, his attendant, said, for Rinpoche, sleep is a disgusting waste of time. Now you hear that, and you just got to kind of groan, you go, oh yeah, okay, right, yeah, thanks. What am I supposed to do with that, you know? And what we've got to understand, the more we realise how we're driven by attachment, it's so natural. Don't think you're some horrible person. It's normal. The point for us is our saving grace is our virtue. That's why we should be so blissed out. That due to past karma, we've created the cause to even want to think about anything more than eating, sleeping and going to the toilet. This is because we practiced some spiritual path in the past life. That's how we're sitting here. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. You should never, ever, ever doubt this, you know. It's unbelievable that we can access our virtue. The animals have those imprints in their mind. They can't access their virtue. Even people on, you know, the world who kill and lie and torture, and ordinary people like fishermen. I mean, not being horrible about people. Because those delusions are so rampant. I mean, one time, it was in Maine, Nick Rebush, who's an Australian, maybe you know him, he runs Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive, and they're based in Boston. And every year on one of Buddha's holy days, they go into Maine and they buy lobsters to save them, to release lobsters. And so one year, it was like 460 lobsters, whatever it was, and they had the local television news reported on it. Well, the lobster fishermen got so offended. You can't imagine. They called up the news and they took them out with them on their boat and they caught exactly that number of lobsters. We're going to show those bloody Buddhas, you know. So you could argue, with being respectful, they couldn't access their virtue. They just got angrier and wanted to kill more lobsters. So it's not being horrible about people. It means the intention to kill is so strong, even in a human body. They can't access their virtue to see the suffering, you know. It's just having compassion for people. Not trying to be superior or anything like that. Not meant to be like that. So the fact that we can access our virtue and want to grow it is absolutely astonishing. And that's because we practiced in past lives. So what I'm getting at is, still, nevertheless, we need our 8 hours sleep, we need our sex and drugs and rock and roll, we need our comfort zone, we need our clothing and our food. Do we not? I mean, just the thought. So then we've got to analyse what is it in Rinpoche's mind. If he is what they say he is, a highly evolved being, let's say, we've got to analyse what would be in his mind then. And you'd have to say what's in his mind has to be, instead of attachment, there's bodhicitta. Now that's too hard. I can't even almost say the words. It overwhelms me to think how that's going to be possible. That means for him, and he's typical of all these high beings, Dalai Lama, all the rest, every second there's the thought of the suffering of the entire universe. And it is so shocking to them, like as if every one of the universe is their children. And the thought of wasting your time to sleep is like unbearable. You have to hear those words. Then when you read about bodhicitta, they read like that. I mean, when I first heard these teachings, I thought these people were insane. But I can now say, and I couldn't think how they could say it with a straight face. Well, I at least say it with a straight face now, because it fits with I'm trying to study it. But to think of having that, can you hear my point? So we have to be very humble and recognise we are driven by attachment. It's completely natural. But luckily we've got our virtues. So what are we going to do then? How do we put bodhicitta into the mix? We hear the Lamas say all the time, "I'll do it with bodhicitta. Have a bodhicitta motivation." You think, what are they on about? What do they mean by that? It's hard for us to hear, you know? So it's like this. It doesn't mean we have to feel like they do. That's plainly absurd. You can't until you're there. But you've got to start somewhere, and you start with a thought. So when we understand, like we've discussed when we talk about creating karma, that mouse, that not only the intention to save a mouse, but the reason you want to save the mouse, that's what makes the action so virtuous. You know, I might save the mouse because I want to put it in the fridge and cook it, you know, and kill it later, fresh, when I want to eat flesh for lunch. That's not a good motivation for saving a mouse, is it? I saved a mouse, but look at my reason. It stinks. You get my point here? I might give Jesse $50 looking like I'm so generous, but my motivation is I want him to give me money. So we can see that a good action is called generosity, but what makes it virtuous for me is my pure motivation. I might see that I'm saving the life of a mouse, which looks so virtuous, but it's because I want to cook it, kill it fresh later. You get my point? Yeah. So the motivation is the point, not even the giving of the money, not even the killing of the mouse. It's the motivation that counts. Can you hear that? But we've got to practice then. Practice putting into the mix a bodhicitta motivation. So how will that play out in our life? Okay. I hear about Lama Zopa thinking that sleep is a disgusting waste of time. I look at my mind and I'm very frank and say, I'm not at that level yet. Like I can be in grade 1 tennis. I can aspire to be like Federer, but I'm not Federer yet. But that doesn't mean, oh, well, I can't be Federer and give up. I know I can become like Lama Zopa, but I can't get ahead of myself. So what do? How do I create the cause, is the words, to become like that? Can you hear my point?
Yes.
So I've got to see Federer, and I've got to know I can become like that. I've got to be inspired by that result. I've got to want to become like that. Isn't it? Then I've got to start trying to hold a racket, first step. You know, you can't even hold a racket yet. But you've got to have that vision and never lose it. You've got to know where you're going. So that's what motivation means. And so then when you start playing tennis, you pick up the racket. What are you doing, Robina? Oh, I'm learning to play like Federer. Don't be ridiculous. Oh, I am. But you've got to have that as your goal, isn't it? I'm going to become like Federer. Well, that's like saying, I'm going to become a Buddha. I'm going to become a Buddha, it says. You just say that instead. So why are you holding up a racket? So I can become like Federer. Why do you get up at 5 o'clock in the morning before you go to school? Because I want to practice tennis. Why? So I can become like Federer. You're not like Federer yet, but you've got to have the motivation to become like Federer. Well, it's the same as a Buddha. It's the same as a Buddha. Well, let's say, you want to become a doctor. Why? Oh, to help people. So you go to university, you plug into becoming, you go into the university, you join up for 7 years of, say, becoming a surgeon. I always think of, you're up in Nepal, and everybody got cataracts. So this is how compassion fits. This is how the thinking goes, step by step. You go to Nepal, you see people with cataracts. This is ordinary analogy. And you go, oh my God, those poor people. That's compassion, okay? Then you have to go, great compassion. You don't just walk away. You now go, what can I do to help? That's great compassion. Now, logically, you're going to check, am I a surgeon? And you have to say, no, I'm not a surgeon yet. No, I'm not a Buddha yet. You with me? You don't just shrug your shoulders and walk away. You then go, I must become a Buddha. I must become a surgeon. Then I can help these people who need their cataracts taken out. Do you agree with that? You see my point? Yes. So that's what bodhicitta is. I must become a surgeon. So what do? That drives you to go home, back to where we are. Where are we? Adelaide, thank you. Back to Adelaide, and you go to the university. Can I become a surgeon, please? How many years is the course? You go 7-year course. Let's say. Now let's say someone hears that you've been in Nepal, and all these people are suffering with cataracts, and then they see you sitting in a bookstore buying books. What are you doing, Robina? You're so selfish. What are you doing? I'm buying books. What for? To become a surgeon. Why? To help people with cataracts. You're not doing anything yet, you're just learning it. How can you say that you're really a surgeon yet? You're not, are you? But if you don't have the thought, I want to become a surgeon, you won't buy those books. So when you go to university every day, why are you sitting in class studying all these boring things? So you can become a surgeon. Why? So you can help people with cataracts. That's bodhicitta. But you've got to say it. And if every day you say, what am I living? So, okay, I get up in the morning. What am I doing? I'm going to become a Buddha. So that means I'm going to eat my breakfast. Why? So I can become a Buddha. Eating food is not a direct cause of becoming a Buddha, believe me. But the normal reason for eating food is attachment, which increases samsara. But you've got to eat food because you can't go without it yet. You're not advanced. So you change your motivation. You pull out the attachment brick and you put in the bodhicitta brick. And you say the words. I know I'm deluded right now. I still need my food. I'm going to eat so I can be healthy, so I can go to university, so I can become a Buddha, so I can benefit people with the cataracts. You get my point here?
Yes.
So it just don't have to be pushing and pushing, oh, bodhicitta, bodhicitta, being all tears and misery, No, you just plug it in there. It's like, I want to become a surgeon. That determines every choice you have. You wake up in the morning, what am I going to do today? Oh, I'm going to become a surgeon. Okay, I've got to have my breakfast. Why? So I can become a surgeon. Then I have my boyfriend, because I get lonely. I'm not ready yet to not have a boyfriend. So why am I having a boyfriend? So I can become a better surgeon. So then having a boyfriend becomes a cause of you becoming a surgeon. And then if you forget you're going to become a surgeon, you'll lose track. You'll start taking a side track. Do you see my point? You've got to remember every day. So just saying it, you change the normal motivation and you put in the bodhicitta motivation. You say it. It's just bare empty words. But guess what? It becomes, as you keep practicing, as you keep studying, you get closer and closer, and eventually, guess what? You'll be a surgeon. And if you didn't motivate, you'd never become one, would you? That's how you put bodhicitta into everything. But you just got to remember it. Do you hear what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's practical. You can't get ahead of yourself. So when I go to sleep in the night time and I sink into my bed, but as you get older, bed is the most delicious thing in the whole world. There's nothing much else to have, is there, you know? And I say to myself, and I'm sincere here, I say to myself, may I find sleep disgusting. No, I mean it, because I'm sowing the seed. And if every day I say that, don't be surprised that next life I'll wake up and not want much sleep. That's how it works. Nothing in your mind goes astray. So you plan for the future. You put the seeds in. And it's reasonable and it's practical. I recognise, instead of being tortured, oh, I'm trying to not have sleep and sit up all night and go crazy, you know. It's ridiculous. Don't be ridiculous. Don't be ahead of yourself. You can't join Wimbledon. You're only in grade 1 tennis. But you aim for it. And that's the power of thoughts. Every thought counts. It's practical. Not meaning I'm eating with bodhicitta, you're supposed to have tears for sentient beings. That'd be ridiculous. You just don't forget your goal, that's all. Buddhahood. So I'm eating, sleeping, going to the toilet, having sex with a new boyfriend, whatever you think. Why? So I can be more healthy, so I can be more focused, so I can become a better surgeon. And slowly that'll start taking over your life and you'll give up the food and sex and drugs and rock and roll and sleep as well. But one step at a time, please. It's practical, it's reasonable, it's not neurotic, it's intelligent, it's logical when you understand the way karma is constructed. Do you understand? Yeah, okay. That'll do about bodhicitta. Didn't really talk about it at all, but roughly speaking. All right, that'll do. Okay, so we think all these thoughts we've all had today, all these ideas, all these thoughts, maybe some tools there, maybe some inspiration, maybe some not, whatever, you're the boss. I'm going to use all this so I can keep moving, keep developing my marvellous, marvellous potential. Never give up on yourself. Get some joy from what we do, you know, get some courage. Be delighted in your marvellous practice. Don't always just go on about the bad stuff. But the more we can own our good stuff, the more courage it gives us to see all the tricks of the delusions, you know. But rejoice in our good qualities, there's no doubt. Delight, delight, delight. So that we can eventually become a Buddha to benefit others. No matter how long it takes, it doesn't matter. One step at a time, one step at a time. Kewadinyu dudar lama sangye drukyune drowa chikyang malupa dei salar gopasho Jang chub sem chog rinpoche, ma kie panam ke gyuchin, kie panyam pa me payang, gong ne gong du bavasho. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Okay. Okay.